Chapter 1788. The second suspicion was that there was a time window between the saint and Yang Ji and Yin Ji. Of course, this was all speculation. However, after Yang Ji and Yin Ji got along, they went to the strong magnetic field to practice and block people. This made people think of something. Finally, if the hole in his brain was bigger, what if this so-called saint came from some upper realm? Then everything would make sense. Using his half-immortal ability to operate his primary energy, at the same time having a variety of superior Tao state abilities, and knowing the general arrangement of many demons in the interior heaven, such a person was a Yin spirit perfected lord. Once he took a step forward, he would be the only one in the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi was very good at associating because there was indeed a force that had been secretly targeting him. From the sun god of Heaven's Choice to the three people from Luo Su's Heaven's Choice, they were all ahead of him. Obviously, the way the three pure ones traveled was not unique to the cultivation world. Many Orthodox Taoists and even Buddhists knew this way. As for this person dying in the Yin Eye, it didn't seem difficult to do. Capturing a perfected lord and hiding him somewhere, killing him when he wanted to escape, and then using the Tao celestial phenomenon as a cover to escape using some kind of spatial ability. These little tricks could also be easily done by Lu Xiaoyi. Why escape? Why pretend to be dead? It seemed to make sense. Gu Xing and Yin Ji were both dead. Since the mission had failed, what else could they do but escape? Wait for him to settle the score with that guy. As for pretending to be dead, this was actually the most harmless way to escape. There was no need to make any promises to the Yangding. As a saint, if you used an excuse to leave, would you still come back? If you came back, you might be caught by Lu Xiaoyi. If you didn't come back, you would lose your reputation. This was a very well-planned plan. Contact the three people to destroy others in the strong magnetic field, win people's hearts at the Yangding, and finally destroy the alliance of the Five Rings. At least destroy a small part of it. If all these inferences were true, it could be seen that this was a very cautious person. He was cautious and well-planned. Once he failed, he would make a prompt decision to leave without any hesitation. In other words, it was very likely that after Lu Xiaoyi killed the three people in the strong magnetic field, this guy had chosen to disguise himself and disappear from the scene. Then, through the interior sky, he directly went to the next place Lu Xiaoyi wanted to go, the anchor chain. It was very awesome and safe. More than a year had passed, so the anchor chain must have been set up? Or was it light? Such an opponent was very interesting and also very challenging. He could run even faster than Runner Lu. If all these were true, this person's name should be Bamboo Hat. Vientiane Prince, Northern Vientiane. Back in the interior realm, everyone's understanding was that everything was renewed and the origin was restored. This was the foundation of the innate Tao of unification. This person seemed to have done the same when he moved the immortals. But now that he thought about it, it seemed that it could also be understood as all-encompassing. What an interesting word. Was is was yang was is yang? It was impossible for him to chase after that person's footsteps. Otherwise, he would never be able to catch up. His plan was not a secret in the interior heaven. It could be speculated simply by who he met. Then he took out the star chart and compared it. Lu Xiaoyi's itinerary was basically confirmed. He wasn't the only one who knew how to calculate distances in the universe. The only thing he could do now was to do his job well. Now, it seemed that the person hiding behind the scenes was more interested in him than his plan. So, the biggest possibility was that both of them chose the same path to immortal ascension? Damn it, there was still someone fighting with him for Hongmeng? He slowly floated into the heavenly palace. Obviously, this was not a completely unguarded place. Familiar faces could enter and leave freely, but a stranger like him could not. A Yin spirit perfected monarch stopped him politely. Where are you from, Tao friend? What do you want? If you want to participate in the Heavenly Palace Convergence, we need to know your background. Lu Xiaoyi's face was indifferent. Go and report to your domain's manager that the third prince is here to look for his junior brother. The Yin master's face was filled with shock. The fifth prince was a hero here. It had only been 1 or 2 years, and his senior brother had already come looking for him? Although it was a joke, he had to take it seriously. What if it was true? He was still counting on this group of princes to save him. When the news spread, several young spirit supremes appeared in front of him in an instant. They were not surprised, doubtful, or happy. The leader of the young spirits looked at him and said gently, "Thank you. Are you the third prince? Are you the senior brother of the fifth prince?" Lu Xiaoyi gently nodded. In fact, if he took out the token of the truthful prince, he could probably achieve his goal. However, it was still a task, and there was a difference in how far he went. If he just pulled Yang Dingren over and ended the Battle of Hung River, then everyone would go their separate ways. This was the most irresponsible perfunctory action. To him, he still hoped that the fifth ring would have more strong reinforcements, not more enemies. Kindness was mutual, especially for this proud domain. It was difficult to expect them to lower their proud heads first. Since he had taken advantage of them and wanted to tie them to the fifth ring's war chariot, why not give them a way out first?
Yes.
I heard that Yang Dingren was in trouble and that my junior brother had died because of it. I thought that it would not be good to give up halfway. Therefore, I came to do my best and bring my junior brother's remains home. Several young gods looked at each other. Although they did not show it, they did not believe it in their hearts. The third prince's arrival was too strange. In fact, it was as strange as the fifth prince. They were not children, and the young god supremes had their own unique views on things. They had a lot of questions about the fifth prince's actions in the past few years, but it was beneficial to Yang Dingren's star body. No matter how many questions they had, they could only keep it to themselves. Now there was another one. Was it the same as the previous one? "We don't even know your name." Yang Dingren appeared to be very cautious, but Lu Xiaoyi knew what they were suspicious of. The fifth prince was very mysterious. Even Lu Xiaoyi had a belly full of doubts after hearing about him, let alone these experienced young gods. What can I say? I'm just asking for confirmation. Let's use facts to speak. I will control yin and yang, and everyone's cooperation is better than 1,000 words. Several young gods agreed. In the cultivation world, one had to use one's ability to speak. This was the most direct thing. Whether it was good or bad, and what the purpose was, they would know with a try. The imbalance of yin and Yang Dingren had troubled them for too long. Although it was not to the point where they were desperate, they had long lost hope in the abilities of their own domain's cultivators. They had placed their hopes on a foreign monk who was good at chanting scriptures. Chapter 1789. In the core area of the Yangqiao Celestial Palace, there was a passage that was thousands of feet deep that went straight to the core of the Yangqiao satellite. This was also the place where Yangding cultivators controlled yin and yang. With this as the center, hundreds of Yang God and Essence Soul cultivators were sitting in a circle on the ground, transmitting spiritual power to the Earth's core through a special array. In the center of the Earth, an old man with white hair and beard was doing his best. He was the old cultivator who had the deepest understanding of yin and yang and the 5 elements. Although his Tao realm was profound, he didn't have a deep understanding of the 5 elements. It was difficult for him to solve the deep problem of Yangding's imbalance of yang energy. If a young cultivator like Lu Xiaoyi presided over it and was still a Essence Soul cultivator, people might not be convinced. However, since there was the 5th prince before, it was acceptable for the 3rd prince to appear now. The key was that no one would lie about this kind of thing. Yang Ding gathered almost all his strength, and the result of pretending to be a ghost here was self-evident. If he didn't have any ability, this was not a place to brag. Seeing that everyone stopped and looked at him, Lu Xiaoyi had seen a big scene, so his expression was calm and his manners were proper. Has my junior brother left any traces of artifacts, changes to the array, or images? The leader of the Yang God group, Kong Yangzi, shook his head.
No.
Let's put it this way, there is no trace of your junior brother here at all. There are no artifacts, no slew, and no words. It's like he has never been here. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Well, my junior brother has such a weird temper. He didn't expect anything in return for his kindness. He deserved to die. So, I need to divide the cultivators of your world according to the 5 elements. Listen to my arrangement. In addition, 2 more young god seniors will go down with me. Kong Yangzi was a little strange, and Lu Xiaoyi could feel it, so he smiled. Does my junior brother go down alone without anyone accompanying him? Kong Yangzi nodded. Yes. Your junior brother spends most of his time in the depths of the Earth's core alone. He never needs my help, and only needs to provide elemental energy support. Only in the beginning did 2 magnetic cultivators go down, but they left quickly. It seems that the magnetic force is useless here. I knew it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly, and his heart was even more certain. The 8 immortals each have their own unique abilities, but I'm different from my junior brother. Why don't I give it a try and see the effect? Yang Ding and the other cultivators followed his instructions. This third prince was humble and amiable, and he treated people with tolerance. He gave people a sense of closeness, which was different from his junior martial brother's arrogance. He made people feel that he was more approachable. He stretched out his hand. Which 2 seniors would like to go down with me? Kong Yangzi stepped forward. I'll go down with senior apprentice brother Yu Yang. Cultivators used their Tao realm to adjust their yin and yang, and each had their own unique secrets. Usually, it was taboo to have outsiders around. If there was someone close to them, it was also a learning process. For outsiders, this was a rare opportunity. Outside the circle, 100 young gods and primordial spirits sat in a circle. Lu Xiaoyi bowed. The change of yin and yang in the domain is not something that can be changed by one person. The only difference between us is the division of labor. Everyone is indispensable. I will do my best down there, and I still need everyone's support. The 100 cultivators all returned the greeting. This was an attitude. With this attitude, even if he didn't succeed, no one would deliberately make things difficult for him. Kong Yangzi and Yu Yang followed the young man down, and their confidence in the cultivator in front of them increased a little. At their position, they no longer judged people by their cultivation realm, but by the way they handled things. The third prince in front of them was much more mature than the 5th prince. Only such a person could go far, because unless they had no other choice, no one was willing to be an enemy of such a person. What kind of orthodoxy could cultivate such a talent? Crown Prince? Dragon Palace? Or a mortal? The depth of thousands of feet was just a moment for the 3 of them. Lu Xiaoyi looked around. It was indeed very narrow down there. It was not that he didn't have the ability to make it bigger, but it was actually disadvantageous to use the Tao realm to make a hole in the yin's eye. It was suspected that it would destroy the natural structure. Lu Xiaoyi politely said to the 2 old cultivators, "One person's plan is short, but 3 people's plan is long. If there is something that I can't do, I hope the 2 seniors can give me more advice. Especially on yin and yang, I actually don't know much. Later, I will have a lot to rely on. I hope the 2 seniors will not hesitate to teach me." You don't know much about yin and yang? Then what are you doing here? But the 2 old young gods didn't express their dissatisfaction. This young man was impeccable in his conduct, and they couldn't bear to criticize him. Lu Xiaoyi moved around the yin's eye. I need to do a little investigation. I asked the 2 seniors to protect me. Then he entered a meditative state, and his divine sense turned into the Tao realm of the 5 elements, sinking into Yang Qiao's satellite. He carefully sensed and searched for the source of Yang Qiao's 5 elements and yin and yang. The 2 old cultivators also sat cross-legged beside him, feeling the changes in Yang Qiao under this person's control. It was very slight. It was just a touch, but he didn't try to change anything. This was the practice of a cautious person, and also the true essence of the Tao realm of Taoism. In this kind of perception, they found that this child's 5 elements ability was extremely profound and had reached a high level. It was just that his connection with yin and yang seemed a little immature, but the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty. 2 hours later, Lu Xiaoyi said solemnly, "Seniors, please lend me a trace of the true essence of yin and yang." Yu Yang didn't hesitate at all. In this situation, he couldn't hide anything. This wasn't for teaching, nor was it for apprenticeship. This was for the realm, and there was nothing to be selfish about. Later, Kong Yangzi also joined in. Yang Xiao was very small, and with the strength of 3 people, they could control it. Lu Xiaoyi began to try to adjust the 5 elements of this star. Where it affected yin and yang, the 2 old cultivators naturally assisted him. At first, they felt that this young man's 5 elements operation was a little reckless, and it had nothing to do with the adjustment, causing the satellites yin and yang to be unstable. The 2 old cultivators were experienced and could only help him find out what he missed. It was only later that they understood that this was just seeking to cooperate with their 5 elements yin and yang. In a word, it was to feel each other out before joining forces so that they could really get started later. He was really careful to the extreme, and his methods were completely different from his junior brother, the 5th prince. It was even more reassuring. If one didn't look at the appearance, this was the behavior of an old cultivator. One day later, they were familiar with each other, and Lu Xiaoyi sent out an invitation to the cultivators on the magic formation. Borrow half of the yang and yin, take me to the yang peak. The cultivators were indeed a little anxious as they waited. This 3rd crown prince was someone who could truly keep his composure. However, he was unlike the 5th crown prince, who had directly penetrated the essence of the 5 cosmos the moment he appeared. They just didn't know who would be the underdog between the 2 brothers. Half of the strength, half of the 10%. Just by looking at the strength used, it was still a test, but this time the test was extended to the yang peak with the help of everyone's supernatural power. The purpose of this was not only to borrow strength, but also to let everyone participate and feel the changes in it together, and not simply to use them, the peripheral cultivators, as supernatural power output machines. This person said that everyone was indispensable, and he did what he said. Chapter 1790. Relying on everyone's joint efforts, Lu Xiaoyi did everything he did on Yangqiao planet again, on Yangding. This kind of dawdling skill made everyone feel unbearable. Even the seasoned fisherman Yangkong Yangzi had some doubts about whether this grandson was dawdling in his work. If he didn't have this ability, then why was he playing tricks here? After another month of dawdling on Yangding, almost everyone was sitting and waiting. The meager output of magical power was almost negligible. Before everyone lost their patience, the 3rd prince was finally ready to start. Good wind, send me to the sky with force. 30% of the power. The cultivators' spirits were lifted. It was time to verify the quality. The magical power of nearly 100 primordial spirit yang spirits was concentrated with the help of the formation. The total amount was majestic. However, Lu Xiaoyi had long been familiar with the characteristics of their magical power. With a little adjustment, he directly turned to Yangding and instantly turned into Tai Yi. The universe was born from then on. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi's eyes were filled with surprise. They didn't expect that the 3rd prince was really dawdling, but when he took action, he was really bold and decisive. It was as if he didn't consider how to wrap things up after his failure. When the 5th prince borrowed everyone's magical power to evolve the essence of the universe, the most he borrowed was only 30%. They didn't expect him to start with 30%. The preparation was indeed sufficient, but when it was implemented, the style changed drastically. It was like a fierce wind and raging fire, wild and unruly. Want to end the yin and yang path? Go to the next level. 50% of the power. Under the support of the magical power of the cultivators, the Tai Yi Dao realm became more and more majestic. It didn't change the internal yin and yang of Yangding, but it directly penetrated the essence of the formation stage of the stars. Next, it would penetrate the whole process of the formation of Yangding. Of course, this kind of penetration didn't take the timeline, but the line of material change. Under the Tai Yi Dao realm, the entire Yangding seemed to turn into nothingness, disappearing from the perception of the cultivators. They knew that it didn't really disappear, and even the mortals living on it wouldn't feel anything. However, from the perspective of the cultivators, Yangding had indeed disappeared, disappearing into the Tai Yi of nothingness before the formation of the universe. Such a miraculous feat was truly admirable. Compared to the 5th prince's concealment last time, he showed strong confidence in the heroic Dafa. It was as if I was the universe, and the universe was me. Although they didn't know what would happen in the future, Yang Dingtian and the other cultivators had benefited greatly from this experience. They also believed that this person's strength must be far above the fifth prince's. From then on, they all went all out and concentrated, not daring to have the slightest bit of disloyalty. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. It wasn't that their state of mind as Yang gods wasn't good enough, but that the future of a realm had been defeated in their hands. This pressure was too heavy to bear. To these domain elders, the leaders of a domain, they could choose not to become immortals, they could choose not to prolong their lifespans, but it was their responsibility to hand over the great rivers and mountains of the domain to their descendants. They had not seen any hope for 1,000 years, but this time, what they saw was not the dawn, but a raging fire. They couldn't help for the time being, but the two of them stood up straight and circled behind their backs. Their chi activity spread out, and they were ready to attack. At this moment, if anyone dared to barge in and cause trouble, that would be the end of a fight to the death. Lu Xiaoyi saw that the Tao momentum had begun to rise. He didn't hesitate any longer. In the vast universe, I'm happy. 70% power. The cultivators of Yangding worked together, and their spirit and willpower were in perfect harmony. With a surge of mana, under the control of Lu Xiaoyi, a wisp of innate qi appeared out of thin air where the Yangding domain had disappeared in everyone's eyes. Like a little light in the eternal darkness, it not only illuminated the universe, but also the hope in people's hearts. 70% of the mana output was already the output of a cultivator in a normal battle. However, they all knew that this was only the second of the 5 ties, and there was still a third. They still didn't know when the 5 elements, yin and yang, would appear. Would it appear? If every change in the Tao state required the support of mana output, how could they withstand it? They had to withstand it even if they couldn't. The mother planet was right below them, and there was no room for retreat. Coincidentally, every cultivator began to use their own methods. Great medicines, magical pets, and Tao weapons began to crazily replenish themselves. No one would remind the third prince to use it sparingly. At this moment, they were only afraid that the changes in heaven and earth were not intense enough and swift enough. Even if they were to be sucked dry, they would be willing. That wisp of innate qi became more and more vigorous in everyone's senses. From wisps of it, it became a blazing torch, and in the end, it seemed to have burned the entire universe. Raise the fire to burn the primordial world, and establish the heavens from now on. 90% power. The innate qi expanded and burned to the extreme in everyone's senses, and it began to gradually dissipate. The Taisher state that had a shape but no substance appeared in everyone's senses. It was a star, an elephant, a cloud, a wind. There was a hazy gray fog, and shadows were everywhere. One of them was pure black in color, and it was completely different from the surroundings that had a shape but no substance. Even if it was surrounded by the Taisher images, it couldn't erase that trace of abnormality. Everyone was shocked. They all felt that this thing seemed to be the source of the chaos after the formation of Yangding. However, because it was too long ago, no one could recognize what it was. Lu Xiaoyi's transformation didn't stop. 11% power. With form but substance, it was Taisher. At this point, in everyone's Tao realm perception, where the Yangding used to be, countless scattered and irregular existences of various sizes began to form. They were solid but not solid, liquid but not liquid, gas but not gas. As for that black spot, it was even clearer, but they still couldn't see what it was. How could such an ancient and strange existence be known by tiny creatures like them? Then, a wave of chaotic aura spread out. It was the state of chaos before yin and yang. The transformation's speed suddenly increased. Chaos gives birth to the universe, and milk is mother. 13%, the power of drinking milk. The eyes of the Yangding cultivators bulged, and the mana in their bodies flowed out crazily. With their eyesight and knowledge, they naturally knew that this was the most crucial moment. If they missed this opportunity, they wouldn't have it again. They didn't need to think too much about themselves and their star domain. Infinity and Taiji. All things were born. At this moment, under the unreserved output of nearly 100 great cultivators, all those chaotic beings suddenly squeezed inwards, and the primitive Yangding started to form. The position of that black spot on the Yangding was completely exposed. It's the underworld ring sinkhole. A Yangding cultivator couldn't help but shout. Lu Xiaoyi activated the Taiji Dao realm and shouted, Yin and Yang separation. Yuyang Kongyangzi had been watching from the side for a long time, and he knew that this was the most crucial moment. Previously, through the 5 Taisher backtracking and evolving the boundary changes, he found the root and location of the Yin flourishing and the Yang declining. Now, he should strike while the iron is hot and bring out the essence of that troublemaker, or destroy it. All of this must be realized in the process of Taiji turning into Yin and Yang. Chapter 1791. When Yin and Yang separated, the black spot that had been dormant and motionless began to struggle violently. However, in the process of searching for the essence of the universe, the cultivators had already locked onto it as a target. Even if it was an ancient object, under the combined efforts of 100 great cultivators, it was uprooted. Without a place to stay, this aura was constantly being worn down as it ran around in all directions. At this point, everyone understood that this thing was the source of the disaster. It had been hidden so deeply that it would be impossible to discover its existence without looking at the essence of the universe. Then, a question appeared in everyone's mind. Did the 5th prince also discover this thing? Or was the 5th prince's death related to this thing? This was an aura that was discovered during the Taisher stage, but it was hard to say when it was produced. It was burned out by the innate qi, but it might not have come from the Taisher stage. It might have come from the beginning, or it might have come from the Tai East stage. It was an aura that couldn't be any more ancient. However, no one could understand how it affected Yangding's Yin and Yang. What was the mechanism? Was it active or intentional? Or was it unconscious? All they could do was bring it out from the depths of Yangding to the surface, and then from the surface to Yangqiao, but they couldn't completely destroy it. This stage was also the stage where the cultivators were crazily outputting their magic power. No one knew if this thing was allowed to escape. Would it continue to return to the Yangding domain to hide and cause trouble, or go to other star domains in the universe? In terms of mood, they had to remove the roots. They couldn't leave any regrets. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi became the main combat power at this stage. Lu Xiaoyi was reduced to cooperating with them. Under the application of the 2 old Yang god cultivators, he returned to his usual rhythm of stealing their knowledge. Yin and Yang were closely related to the 5 elements. His attainments in the 5 elements were quite deep, so he learned about Yin and Yang very quickly. In the process of learning, he found that the efforts of the Yangding cultivators didn't have much effect. This thing couldn't be solved by the Yin and Yang Dao realm. In other words, it couldn't be solved by any Dao realm for the time being. Yu Yang also found this problem. We can't deal with it. 3rd prince, can you try to use the power of the 5 elements again? Lu Xiaoyi took over the control again. He didn't have the confidence to deal with this completely unfamiliar thing. Because he didn't understand it, he couldn't make a plan to deal with it. He could only reluctantly do it. The previous operation was actually all his ability. He wanted to use the process of the universe's formation to discover where Yangding's problem came from. He did it, but he couldn't solve it. Now, it was like forcing a duck onto a perch. But the effect was beyond everyone's expectations. Before Lu Xiaoyi's great Dao concept could be fully unleashed, that thing suddenly disappeared. It looked like his 5 grand Dao realm was the right medicine for the problem. Was it over? Is it over? All the cultivators searched for it, but they completely lost track of it. Kong Yangzi let out a long breath. This favor was too great, and he didn't know how to repay it. The magic power dissipated. Everything was over, but it was also the beginning. Old Taoist Yu Yang looked at him calmly and said, "Fellow Taoist, you and the 5th prince are not fellow disciples. Your techniques are completely different. If my guess is correct, he isn't the so-called fifth prince, and you aren't the third prince either. You're from the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi smiled without saying a word. The cultivators outside might not be able to sense it, but these two old fogies were definitely able to sense it. Kong Yangzi muttered, "The fifth prince isn't actually dead?" Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. "I don't have any evidence, but it's not difficult to escape." The two young gods didn't say anything. Of course, it was easy to do. It was just that they didn't want to think in that direction. For someone who had once extended a helping hand to Yang Ding, no one would be willing to judge him with malice. But once suspicion arose and they thought back, there were too many abnormalities. It was just that they were immersed in the joy of solving the problem and didn't want to think too much about it. Kong Yangzi was very sharp. "Your opponents?" Lu Xiaoyi took out the token of the innocent prince. "It's all here. Take a look." The two old young gods scanned it with their divine senses and immediately had mixed feelings. The enemy had become the benefactor. This was the most difficult cause and effect to clear up. Lu Xiaoyi knew that this kind of conversation was very important. If he wasn't careful, what he did before might be in vain. "I'm just for the mortals of Yangding. It has nothing to do with Yangding's cultivation world. The reason why I acted was because of the mysterious fifth prince. So, you don't need to be in a dilemma. There are two things that I need an answer to. First, will you join the Extermination Alliance? Second, I need all the information about the fifth prince. I don't believe that you didn't leave any traces." The two old Taoists looked at each other. Kong Yangzi was very straightforward. "We will join. 30 young gods who are the best at fighting will set off immediately. There's nothing to hesitate about." As for the information about the fifth prince, he didn't show any malice towards Yangding. "We can't hurt other friends just because we want to thank you. This isn't the way of cultivation." Lu Xiaoyi wasn't angry. Instead, he took out a shadow recording stone. "Take a look. Then you can decide whether the fifth prince is Yangding's friend." The video was very short, but it was clear at a glance. Kong Yangzi's face was very ugly. There were various reasons, such as the fifth prince's private instigation and the swordsman's ruthlessness, but in the end, he controlled himself and didn't show it. Yangding's attitude towards the five rings had already been divided into two factions, and they were opposing each other. So far, the best method was to control the cause of death of the two magnetic force cultivators and use the opportunity of the return of Yin and Yang to choose to reconcile. If they were to continue opposing each other, it would be too difficult for Yangding in terms of the overall situation. "Who is that monk?" Lu Xiaoyi played it down. "He's from the Hengyi Orthodoxy." Kong Yangzi sighed. In the end, he couldn't avoid this trap. In fact, it wasn't important to Yangding whether or not he joined this alliance to suppress the Hengyi Orthodoxy. They didn't interfere with each other and didn't have any connections. Of course, he wouldn't feel any psychological burden if he fought. However, the problem was that the initiator this time was the fifth ring. If he chose to join, it meant that he was biased towards the fifth ring and away from the East Heaven main world's Buddhism. Originally, they didn't want to choose a faction so quickly, but now, it seemed that they had no choice. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He was also a decisive person and wouldn't be overcautious in such a situation. The changes in the universe were accelerating, and there wasn't much time left for everyone. It was impossible to make a choice after seeing the clues of the strong and the weak. That would be the stupidest illusion. Later, senior brother Yu Yang will give you something in this regard. It might not be comprehensive, but that person is really careful. We can't go too far. I'm representing Yangding here. As long as the fifth ring has Daoist Lu, Yangding will not continue to resist. I'm willing to cooperate with the fifth ring on appropriate occasions. Chapter 1792. Lu Xiaoyi breathed a sigh of relief. At least the results in Yangding were not bad. Yangding's yin and yang treatment would continue. It was like a person whose accumulated load was gone, but he still needed to spend a lot of time to recuperate. This was Yangding's problem, and it was a painstaking effort. He didn't hide the fact that he killed Yang Ji and Yin Ji, and he never bothered to hide it. However, How far this matter spread was Kong Yangzi and Yu Yang's business. Now, it seemed that they had adopted the most rational response. Resolving a hidden problem that had existed for millions of years was a great virtue. He could use this to ask Yangding for something, but if he did, it might be an exchange of interests. If he didn't ask for anything, he would use this great virtue as a cornerstone to get along with, and there would be endless possibilities. He had been preparing. The happy life of a general or a crow ancestor was not his path. He also didn't want to be an ancestor who needed the younger generation to wipe his ass for him. The most basic attribute of a pawn was to do one's duty well. When he left Yangding, he received the highest courtesy from Yangding. Even if his identity as the fifth ring Xianyuan swordsman was now known to the world, he still received the recognition of every major cultivator in Yangding because he saved their mother. I like to join in the fun. This is probably the unified impression that the universe has of me. When he left, he faced hundreds of supreme Yangding cultivators and laughed at himself. If the universe is calm and peaceful, and it is more lively to recall the past and resolve hatred, then I will be a vengeful person. If the future is more exciting and unpredictable, then I will look forward. In comparison, I think the future will be exciting for at least 10,000 years, and I don't want to miss it. This requires me to focus. The worst thing is to mix the past and the future together, just like mixing new and old fat together. The result is mellow and fierce intertwined, full of vigor, and also to the top. Everyone more or less knows about karma. If everyone puts their own karma together, it will become a ball of thread that can never be torn apart. So we need to know what's important and what's not. We need to learn how to forget and how to be patient. What Lu Xiaoyi did today was not to show kindness deliberately, and it was not the heart of a saint. It was just an accident of countless coincidences. Forget it. Then everyone would try to be friends. Let's see if it's possible for us to stand together in the storm of the future. After Lu Xiaoyi left, he didn't know if he managed to find an ally for fifth ring Xianyuan, but in terms of personal charm, Yangding was convinced. He was in a hurry to leave, but it wasn't only because he was in a hurry to leave. No matter how much he hurried, he wouldn't be able to catch up to that bamboo hat. He was in a hurry to find a secluded place because he wanted to figure out that mysterious thing that had entered the depths of his Sparrow Palace's consciousness. That's right, that aura, that strange existence hadn't been destroyed at all. Instead, it had burrowed into his sea of consciousness, as if this was its new home. If it stayed, it wouldn't leave. It couldn't be chased away, dispelled, or melted. This was the current state of this thing. Lu Xiaoyi needed to study it carefully, not because he wanted to get any help from it, but because he was worried that this thing would ruin his cultivation. On Suntop Planet, it did not have much use. But this wasn't absolute. After all, for millions of years, it was still very obedient most of the time. Otherwise, it wouldn't be as prosperous as Yangding was now. As for the consequences now, it was just a mysterious reaction caused by the changes in the universe. He believed that this thing was passively changing. Even so, he still had to figure it out. Because if he took this thing in for an individual cultivator, the changes would be much more frequent than the changes in the universe. If it really messed up the juncture of his cultivation, he might not be able to bear it. He sat cross-legged in the air, sank his mind into a sea of consciousness, and used all kinds of methods. Spiritual consciousness, Tao realm contact, Sparrow Palace pressure. In the end, he had no choice but to accept the fact that this thing was at least at a higher level than him, a half-immortal. Therefore, all his efforts were in vain. After many attempts, the only result he got was that this was probably an existence that was formed before Taisher. For some unknown reason, it rejected the normal changes in the universe and stuck to itself, waiting to wake up or never wake up. He didn't rashly try to force it. This thing was in the wrong place. It was in his sea of consciousness, which was the most difficult place for humans. Those fragments of the great Tao didn't show any abnormalities. They didn't welcome the newcomer, nor did they reject him. It was as if they didn't see him and didn't feel anything. It felt a little like the primordial purple chi in the legends of his previous life, but he knew that this wasn't it. In this cultivation world, The 3 graces were still after the 5 graces, but this aura had already appeared at least during Taisher's time, or perhaps even earlier. After thinking about it, he wasn't completely sure if his harvest this time was a blessing or a curse. He could only continue to walk and see. But he secretly reminded himself that fate was actually a double-edged sword. If you use the same thing well, it would be a blessing. If you didn't use it well, it would be a curse. It wasn't certain. He was exceptionally careful with his own path. Because he had reached the half-immortal realm, it was no longer possible for him to hide himself among the huge group of cultivators like before. Sometimes he would ask himself if he was the inheritor of the Sword Mountain Range, the most restless group in the universe, and thorns were constantly emerging, then to some people, would he really be allowed to develop and grow freely? Impossible. In view of the fact that immortals and half-immortals couldn't descend to the mortal world, there wouldn't be any direct targeting. But there would be a lot of secret planning. Then, was this bamboo hat part of it? This was also the characteristic of his meticulous thinking. Along the way, he had been secretly laying traps, and he had a feeling of uneasiness. Zhou Xian was the first time he was stopped. Then it was Luo Sutian, Yongding. He got through it without any danger. Not only did he kill the opponent who provoked him, but he also gained the recognition of most of the Buddhist monks in Luo Sutian. It could be said that he gained a lot. But was it really like this? If it was too smooth, it meant that you might not realize where the danger came from. Was it the inner demon wearing the bamboo hat? He didn't think so. At least this person didn't pose a threat to him now. But there was one thing he was very curious about. How did this person manage to walk in front of him every time? Every cultivator had their own pattern of activity before becoming a half-immortal, and it didn't completely overlap. Even Qing Xian, who had been traveling with him for nearly 1,000 years, actually didn't have the same cultivation path as him. His experience was rarely seen among cultivators. He had been to many great realms, and this was not an ordinary run. There were very few cultivators at the same level in the universe who could match him, not to mention that there were people who had more trajectories than him. Especially, he could cover his tracks. How did he do it? Could it be explained by coincidence? Or was there another reason? Chapter 1793. In the depths of the universe, a true spirit loomed. Many years had passed, but he had his responsibilities. In this position, he would never be idle. The heavenly Tao collapsed, and the universe changed. There were very few people who could stay in the lower realm to control the leaders. Moreover, all of them had to restrict their own behavior. This was the rule. Although the heavenly Tao was collapsing, the core was still there. Especially in this final stage, it was even more impartial and crazy. The slightest indulgence would be severely punished. In such troubled times, no one was willing to fall before the final change. He had been in charge of Heaven's Eye for many years. Not to mention meritorious deeds, he didn't make any mistakes either. He just wanted to peacefully get through this final stage and see what kind of fate a true immortal like him would end up in the end. Heaven's Eye had for leaders, no matter high or low. However, as a human leader, he was in charge of the eastern sky. There was no need to doubt his right to speak here, even if he was more and more unwilling to use this right now. The more he moved, the more trouble there would be. However, there were still some deep pits that he had to jump into. There was greater pressure from above, and also from the self-protection instinct of the orthodoxy. In this kind of silence, consciousness descended and briefly communicated with each other in their hearts. Finally, as for the lower realm of half-immortals, there have been signs since the middle stage of the universe's transformation. Some ambitious people will get the first chance. You have to pay attention to their actions and control the abnormality within an acceptable range. The true spirit existence was speechless.
I will do my best.
But I don't know what's the point of doing this. It will bring a great impact to the lower realm. In fact, before they came to the lower realm, they had already begun to plan to massacre the lower realm. The consciousness played it down. No matter, let them be. It's not just one group, but 2 groups. Since they're jumping around happily, we have to give them a stage to show off? That place is just right. The true spirit existence understood tacitly. The higher-ups were indeed brilliant. The geniuses of the inner and outer scenic heavens were the first to descend to the lower realm. This was something that the immortal court could not control. This was the natural process of the changes in the great Tao. However, what they could do was to bring the two groups of people who were not convinced of each other together through an ingenious method. If they had a battle, it would be the best way to destroy humanity. No one could say anything. After the consciousness communication, it gradually faded away, leaving behind only a faint divine intent. Have you sent out the thing I asked you to arrange? The true spirit existence replied, It's been sent out. Borrowing someone else's hand and throwing a brick to attract jade is an opportunity. But what I don't understand is, can such a precious thing be given away? The faintly discernible divine intent grew fainter and fainter. It's only precious if it's useful. If he couldn't use it, it would just be a mere worldly possession. Since we can't use it, why not give it to the most outstanding juniors? The true soul being sighed softly. There were two sides to a matter, good and bad. This was the dialectic of the cultivation world. However, these experts had never mentioned that this kind of duality also depended on probability. If the bad side accounted for 99% of the time, and the good side only existed in theory, would it still be two-sided? It was just a trick to fool the cultivators below. However, he still had to deal with this matter without leaving any traces. This was a kind of instinctive self-protection. He lowered his consciousness and issued a command through the heaven's eye system. Now that everything is done, you should return to the interior heaven as soon as possible. The heaven's eye's concealment won't last long. When it comes to fighting for Tao, one should take a long view of the future. There was no need to rush it. Otherwise, no one would be able to save you. The people below were obsessed with fighting and killing, but this was a very stupid method. Only when one reached their realm would they know that the best way to kill someone was to let them cultivate until they died. This was the true meaning. Lu Xiaoyi realized that he was in some trouble. It wasn't the problem of the anchor chain. In fact, he had already handed over the problem of the anchor chain to a group of emissaries such as Luminous Light. They had been working here for hundreds of years and had nothing to do, so it wouldn't be abrupt for them to come forward. He went directly to Fuqian to complete the connection between the last two realms. 60 years had passed since then, which meant that the group of 5 ringed young gods had been flying in the void for 60 years. They weren't too far away from the anchor chain. Just as he had always been used to, he would cultivate as he hurried along the long journey. He was already familiar with this pattern. Since he started to establish his superego more than 60 years ago, his superego had been finalized and perfected. All that was left was the polishing of time. He didn't need to deliberately spend time. It was like a person who had reached adulthood and had a skeleton. The remaining flesh and blood was only related to his experience. If he did well, he would be a little fat. If he didn't, he would be a skeleton. With his superego set, he began to search for his past. According to the situation after he became a young god, he needed a stable rebirth point. Because it was an ancient method, he didn't need to hide it too much. He only needed to be stable and consistent. This was what he needed to do now. When all this began, he fell into a dilemma. Compared to the countless pasts of others, his pasts were pitifully small.
It was as if he only had 2 parts.
One was the memory of his past life, and the other was a flying sword. This made his search for the past somewhat illusory and discordant. Of course, he knew that he was a transmigrator. His past life was an indispensable part of his life, but he also thought that his past couldn't be just this, right? Wasn't it a little too monotonous? What about the past of Lu Xiaoyi, the real body that he occupied? Was it erased just like that? There was also a past that was a sword. It didn't even have any story or growth experience. It was just a lonely sword standing there, making people baffled. He also understood that there was an unbreakable connection between him and this flying sword. He could even associate it with a lot of things, starting from Lord Jiao and the peacock plume, and the shock hidden deep in the hearts of those seniors in the dome.
He knew all of it.
There was also Bajie and Uncle Zhai, and the Black Dragon. All of these were probably related to his past experience with his flying sword. The flying sword's past didn't show anything. He also couldn't remember if he was originally a flying sword, or was he an amazing swordsman. Otherwise, it didn't make sense for him to have such a powerful swordsman talent. The more he cultivated, the more he felt that his talent in swordsmanship was helpful to him. Could it be that I was that grandson Li Wuya in my past life? As soon as this thought appeared, it immediately made him feel uneasy and uncomfortable. He didn't know what others would think. Would they be secretly happy that he might be the reincarnation of some earth-shattering figure in history? Would they think that he had an extraordinary background? Anyway, he wouldn't. He respected Ancestor Crow from the bottom of his heart. He was an amazing figure, a figure that could move the universe. He might be a good elder, a good sword immortal, a good master, or even a good father. But he just couldn't be him. This made Lu Xiaoyi unable to place his pride. Chapter 1794. From Lu Xiaoyi's point of view, he should be himself and could only be himself. Even if he was a worm, an ant, forever crawling on the ground, that would still be the one, and only him. When he discovered that his past was somewhat mysterious, he, who had always looked down on those reincarnated people for no reason, discovered that he was the biggest bug among the reincarnated cultivators. He had lived a life that even he hated. If he didn't work hard, would he still be where he was now? For 2,000 years, he walked step by step, always thinking that it was because of his hard work and effort, but in the end, he discovered that he might be the most awesome second-generation cultivator in the universe. If all of this was true, then what was the point of this kind of cultivation? For the first time, he had doubts about himself. To a cultivator, this was a very dangerous step. If it wasn't handled well, it could destroy the mental state that had been established for 2,000 years. After 2 periods, he still wasn't satisfied. He began to search for his true self. A self that could satisfy him and continue to cultivate. Regrettably, other than these 2 periods of his past, everything else was empty. Under normal circumstances, normal people would choose this flying sword as their reference point of their past. Anyone could see that it was extraordinary, just like an immortal sword. If anyone wanted to cut him in the past, who knew how many people would be buried by this immortal sword? But his first choice was definitely not to choose this immortal sword. If he had to have an immortal sword, then it could only be Qi and no other. This was very important to him, because only then could he be his true self. And not another person's continuation in another way, even if that person used to be incomparably glorious. While flying, he kept thinking about this problem. Considering all aspects, cultivation, fighting, future height, connections, and so on, inheriting this kind of past would only bring him benefits and no harm. Except for one thing, whether or not he could get past himself. In terms of ethics, he had fallen into a vicious circle, which also deepened his confusion about reincarnation. If everyone had a past life, and they all had different forms of life in different periods of time, then where did the prosperity of mankind come from? Where did the increase in population come from? Was it the decrease in worms? That didn't seem to be the case. Following the stable development of the universe, other than a very small number of mutants, those large races seem to have expanded countless times, and it wasn't just humans. What kind of reincarnation did these new ones come from? The foundation of the perfect mechanism of the great Tao of reincarnation was that the total amount was constant, but he could not see this. What he saw was a universe where the population was exploding, and so was the insect's mouth. This was his intuition. He hoped to become the inheritor of Xuanyuan's sword vein in this era, but he definitely didn't want to do it in this way. He was a transmigrator, but at the same time, he was also a native. Then who was he? Was he a transmigrator? Was it an immortal sword? Or was it someone else? That young master from Lu province? Throughout this journey, he had been constantly searching for his past, constantly weighing his options in his heart. This was not looking for trouble, but a true attitude of being responsible for his own future. The future superego determines the direction, and the past self determines the origin. Is it wise to give up on a divine sword? Was he putting on an act? Was it just for his own pitiful pride? What was the purpose behind the immortal sword? What would he lose if he gave it up? These were all things that he needed to consider. It was hard to determine the future. It would determine whether his foundation was upright or not. This would affect the height he could reach in the end. The floating and sinking realm was hidden in a vast nebula of gas and dust. As it moved according to the laws of its own celestial body, it would sometimes rise from the nebula and sometimes sink into the nebula. It was like the rising and falling of the sun on the surface of the sea. This was called floating and sinking. It was very spectacular. From the perspective of cultivators in the universe, it was impossible for mortals to appreciate the beauty of their celestial bodies. Before he even got close to the macromembrane, a yang spirit flashed out of it, followed by a few primordial spirit divine lords. Lu Xiaoyi didn't avoid them. Floating and sinking had a worldly macromembrane. He couldn't enter and leave other people's worldly macromembranes without making a sound. If he really did so, it would be very impolite. But when the yang spirit spoke, he was still shocked. Fellow Taoist Lu, you've come to floating and sinking to invite troops, right? A year ago, 30 yang spirits of my floating and sinking set out to assemble in the beast territory. This humble Taoist, Go Yu, has been waiting here. He rubbed his nose, feeling a bit embarrassed. It's a bit shameful for a diplomatic envoy to get to this point. It turns out that my actions have been noticed by someone, but I don't know who did it. In the future, I'll go and thank them when I meet them. Go Yu smiled. Don't bring the disputes between the evildoers of your interior heaven to the main world. We don't know who sent the message. He has the investigation of the cultivators of our floating and sinking upper realm, so it can't be faked. In addition, he also asked me to tell you that he also conveyed the news of the light world on your behalf. He's just afraid that fellow Taoist Lu will be tired from running errands. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. It wasn't that he didn't trust this floating and sinking yang spirit, but this bamboo hat man's actions were always unexpected. It seemed that he wasn't as incompetent as he thought. Obviously, this bamboo hat man's connections in Eastern Elephant Heaven were limited. It was already not easy to find a few helpers in Zhou Xian, Luo Su Heaven, and Yangding. It was indeed impossible to find more helpers. A Northern Heaven orthodoxy could stir up trouble in Eastern Heaven. This ability couldn't be underestimated. If Lu Xiaoyi went to Northern Heaven, apart from Zhou Xian, he wouldn't be able to find a single helper. Go Yu was very considerate. If fellow Taoist Lu still has doubts, I'll lead fellow Taoist Lu into floating and sinking. You can see the magnificent mountains and rivers of floating and sinking. Fellow Taoist Lu hasn't been here yet, right? As a guest from afar, I can't be rude as the host. Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly. I don't dare to doubt Senior's words. Since I've achieved my goal, I won't disturb you any longer. I still have other places to go. Go Yu nodded understandingly. The two sides exchanged a few pleasantries before parting ways. Go Yu returned to his realm, but he was a little disappointed that he didn't know where to go. The last 3 realms didn't need him? He could imagine that since floating and sinking had been notified, Anchor Chain must be the same. It was just that luminous light and a few others were kept in the dark by Anchor Chain. This secret work was done well. However, Anchor Chain could have left 20 to 30 young spirits in 8 realms without anyone noticing. They couldn't be blamed. After all, their realms weren't high enough. This was a very cunning and flexible opponent. After seeing that the Alliance couldn't effectively stop him, he simply stopped looking for people to kill. Instead, he took all the credit for the Alliance. This could be considered a moderate blow to him and the 5th ring. He had seen deeply. Furthermore, his buttocks were sitting very upright. Chapter 1795. After this series of collisions, he already had some understanding of this hidden opponent. He was almost certain that he was not Hung River's helper, but had some kind of unknown connection with Hung River. In the end, he still chose to join the alliance. This was a statement to tell him, between us is only a battle of Tao, nothing else. He knew when to advance and retreat. In fact, he had to compromise with the relatively unfamiliar Xiang Tian. No matter how many connections he had, he could not mobilize people as he wished. To deal with a strong person like Lu Xiaoyi, a strong primordial spirit and yang spirit was the minimum. Gu Xing, Yang, and Yin were already the strongest combination he could find. If he had more, it would not be his ability. How could such a strong person be manipulated by a few words and a few treasures? Therefore, there was a big change in the three realms. I won't find people to harm you, and I will help you pass the message. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi also ran a lot of errands, but this kind of gathering merit fell to others. It was also a kind of disguised competition. This bamboo hat man was very flexible and not constrained. He was a character. More than 70 or 80 years had passed. No matter what, in terms of purpose, he had achieved it. Whether it was done by himself or by others under pressure, it was done. These people all had the cultivation of yang spirit. Needless to say, they had self-control and were able to see the big picture. It was impossible for them to gather together to fight. With the five-ring yang spirit group as the leader, with the help of Zhou Xian's natural selection, the occasional dispute would not expand. He had to believe in their wisdom and that their thousands of years of life were not obtained by eating. When he was in the interior sky, he, Qing Xian, and the marching monk inferred that the collapse of the 13th Great Way would happen in 1 or 200 years, leaning towards the period of a little more than 100 years. This inference was based on the experience after the collapse of the 12th Great Way. It was not completely nonsense. Then he actually had at least 20 or 30 years. Should he go to the beast territory and wait? Or should he take this time to do something of his own? For him, going to Hung River boundary was a very simple matter. It would not take much time to go through the interior sky. He had made up his mind. Without any hesitation, he leaped up and went straight to the interior view sky. He skillfully operated it, and when he appeared again, he was already near Luo Sutian. He wasn't here to cause trouble for the monks. Even if he wanted to, it shouldn't be at this time. Even if the so-called three distresses really wanted to do something, they might not have the ability to do so. Under the general trend of cultivation, any individual's resistance was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Appearing in Luo Su's sky, he already had some understanding of the surrounding star field. 5 rings, blue sky, Luo Su sky, sun top, formed an irregular quadrilateral. The positions of the 5 rings were constantly changing. However, he had to remember these locations in his heart. It would save him a lot of time. After choosing a direction, he flew at full speed. 3 years later, he entered an area with a lack of spiritual energy. Here, cultivation planets were very rare. Occasionally, there would be low-quality cultivation planets, and even mid-quality cultivation planets were rare. This was a large area that the mainstream cultivation world didn't like. The universe was changing, and the Great Tao was collapsing. No one here cared about it. They couldn't even fly out of the universe, so what was the point of thinking about it? No matter how much the universe changed, how bad could it be? This was the difference between a low-level star and a high-level star. With different positions, their thoughts would naturally be different. For a low-level star, what they saw was more hope, and the space to go up was far greater than the space to go down. However, for a high-level star at the top of the cultivation world, the probability of falling down was higher. Lu Xiaoyi was searching. There were more than a dozen inferior cultivation planets in this enormous poor spirit sky territory. However, he wasn't familiar with the planet he was looking for, because he was too weak when he left. He was so weak that he couldn't even determine the location of the planet. He was looking for a low-quality star, his real home planet. With senior sister Yan Dai's general description, he also relied on his own intuition. This was the answer he wanted to find for himself during his decades of free time. He couldn't think of anything if he only thought about it in the void. He needed an environment. Other than the low-quality star, he had nowhere to go. If he wanted to go to the low-quality star, he couldn't start from the 5th ring. At that time, The fifth ring was relatively close to the low-quality star. He also ran in the negative space for a few years. However, the fifth ring had flown out for 2,000 years, even if it flew very slowly. According to the star map, Luo Sutian was the closest to the poor spirit sky region. That was the reason why he returned to this path. After searching for 2 years, he found the only mid-quality cultivation planet in this area. The low-quality star was just around the corner. From afar, looking from the void of the universe, a pale yellow, thin, and ugly planet was hanging alone in the void. It was rotating contentedly as if it was a different world from the universe outside. For Lu Xiaoyi, who had been out there for 2,000 years and had seen countless magnificent wonders in the universe, calling it ugly was a bit of an overstatement. If it were not for the fact that its name was Junior 3, he would not have taken a second look at such a celestial body. A son didn't mind his family being poor, a son didn't mind his mother being ugly. This was a planet that couldn't even be considered as cannon fodder in the cultivation world of the universe. However, when he looked at it, a feeling that he had never felt anywhere else spontaneously arose from the depths of his soul. It was the feeling of returning to his hometown after decades of wandering. His relatives and old friends were long gone. He was hesitant when he thought about it. He was afraid that someone would recognize him, but he knew that it was impossible. He was worried that everything had changed due to the change of environment. Even his local accent was a bit unfamiliar. He had to keep repeating it himself to find that feeling, homesickness. Even if he was a half-immortal, he couldn't avoid it. There were no cultivators coming in and out. In his memory, there seemed to be a few Yuanying in the low-quality star. They were the kind of weak, nascent soul cultivators who didn't dare to leave the domain. Just like how Lu Xiaoyi couldn't even find the cultivation method after he reached the Zhuji phase, it was the same for the Yuanying stage cultivators here. For them, the cultivation path above the Yuanying stage was a completely strange one. There was nothing, and they could only rely on themselves to slowly explore. It was conceivable that with such strength, how would they dare to go out into the void and join the mainstream cultivation world of the universe? Therefore, this place was really empty. The few people who were qualified to come out didn't dare to come out, and the cultivators outside were too lazy to go in. In fact, not to mention the low-quality star, under normal circumstances, cultivators would try their best to avoid this area when passing by. How could there be any opportunities in such a place? They were all a bunch of poor cultivator beggars. Lu Xiaoyi's mood was complicated.
He was a little sad.
Yan Dai had invited him many times, but he was so busy that he could never find the time. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, what was he busy with? He just felt that there was no point in coming here. Now that he felt that he needed such an environment for his cultivation, he just came here. To him, missing his hometown was just a kind of shiny label that he stuck on the outside for others to see. In fact, he had never really thought about this place in his heart. He was also a hypocrite, no different from those Taoists and monks. Chapter 1796. When it was useful, it was his home planet. When it was useless, it was just an inconspicuous time in his memory. He was far inferior to senior sister Yan Dai in terms of mental state. It was a pity that he had never understood it. What was he thinking? He wasn't that kind of person. Did he think that as a transmigrator, he didn't have a home planet in this cultivation world? Or did he think that junior sister was no longer worthy of him? Only a super big world like the Five Rings world was worthy of Lu Xiaoyi's reputation? Usually, he didn't realize it. Only when he came back here did he understand what the so-called returning home meant. All the reasons were excuses. You didn't come back because you didn't want to. Now that you're back, it's because you want to get something from your hometown. As long as you want to, what can stop you from returning home? What can you delay? The sentimental sentiments of countless wanderers in their hometowns collapsed in front of him, and the beautiful words of literature collapsed with a loud bang. There was only one reason: selfishness. This included Lu Xiaoyi. With this feeling of self-blame, he restrained his breath to the extreme and quietly entered the clouds. He hesitated for a moment in the clouds. He was really a little timid, a little expectant, and a little worried. He didn't know if what he saw would be the same as what he remembered if he passed through the clouds. He was like a mortal who had been away for many years. When he pushed open the door to his small courtyard, he was nervous. Did the owner change? Did they build a new grave? Did the elders have more white hair? Fortunately, he only needed to look at things and didn't need to think about people. He didn't need to waste his divine sense on this small planet. He only needed to look around to find the location of the illuminating kingdom and Pooh City. Pooh City was the same as what he remembered from 2,000 years ago. It was still an unknown third-tier city. This was determined by its inconspicuous geographical location. Even if the dynasties changed and the passage of time, its style couldn't be changed. Only the desert outside the city was closer to the city walls. This was due to the erosion of sand and wind, the invasion of nature. After 2,000 years, there were no mortal buildings that could remain intact after 2,000 years. They had all existed for countless generations, and no traces of their original state could be found. Only a few roads in the city still vaguely retained their original paths. This was a place where the pace of life was very slow. The universe was changing, and the dynasties were changing. When the news reached this place, it was silent. The original site in Lu Province was long gone. Not a single brick or tile was left behind. Speaking of which, with the level of construction technology here, wouldn't it have turned into dust by now? It was replaced by a small market, turning the original residential area of the rich into a market for the common people. It was very normal. After all, with the passage of time and the calamity of war, nothing could remain the same. Lu Xiaoyi found a small tavern in the original location of Lu Province. As he drank the familiar liquor, he thought about the location of the tavern. Was it a stable or a concierge of Lu Province? He had also chatted with Little Fool about the past, but he quickly gave up. The memories of mortals were completely oblivious to the changes 100 years ago, and they could only rely on guesses. They could only rely on what their ancestors had said, not to mention what happened 2,000 years ago. They only knew that in these 2,000 years, there had been 5 dynasties. Then, who would know about the so-called Lusima mansion from 5 dynasties ago? There were no records of it in the history books. It had completely disappeared, as if it had never existed. If one did not rely on cultivation, one could only rely on poetry and essays to leave behind something in this mortal world. Unfortunately, Lusima was just a bureaucrat. His poems were not passed down, and he did not leave behind any great achievements. He was also not bad enough to shake the heavens and earth. He was destined to be forgotten by history. When he left Pooh City, he had a loyal servant who was willing to protect his family. It was just a vision. How could a mortal family without extraordinary power protect him for 2,000 years? It was good that he had such intentions. He had never asked for extravagant wishes, so he was not disappointed. Sitting there, he was in a relaxed mood. It was just a kind of helpless reminiscence. He recalled the bits and pieces of his past when he was the young master of Lu Province. There was only one place left in Pooh City that could still occupy a place in his memory. Chow Fong Brothel, where young Master Lusima often called his friends to drink wine. It was an ancient profession and ancient inheritance. It had more vitality than the 3 pure ones. One could not help but sigh at the wonders of this world. The brothel had been renovated countless times, but the big agarwood plaque was still intact. No matter how many times it was painted, it could not hide the vicissitudes of time. Thus, Chow Fong Brothel had another strange guest. He ordered a table full of his favorite dishes, but he did not touch them at all. He just stared blankly at the lights outside the window and drank by himself. The high-spirited voices of the youths came from the private room next to him, urging him to drink. The topic was not far from riding a horse and carrying a sword, becoming a disciple, cultivating, becoming a mutant. It was just like their small group 2,000 years ago. Yes, Little 7 reincarnation, it was always reincarnating. Life was reincarnating, and so were stories. The music girl beside him saw that he was unhappy, so she spoke softly. What is the young master unhappy about? If you say it out loud, I might be able to enlighten you. Don't keep it in your heart to avoid harming your body. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Here it comes again. The small farm in the south of Pu City had not been expanded into a city or a town. The other cities in the Kingdom of Darkness had their own development, but Pu City was bad because it was adjacent to the Gobi Desert. It was not a livable place, so after 2,000 years, the population did not increase much. Who would be willing to place their ancestral property in a place that was destined to be swallowed by the desert? Therefore, it was still a farm, but it had changed owners countless times. The current owner obviously did not care much about this place, so the whole field was perfunctory and slightly dilapidated. His mother's and Aunt Kai's tombs had long been flattened. It was not their bodies that were flattened, but time. However, Lu Xiaoyi could still accurately find the right place, because he had used the power of a cultivator to reinforce the underground after he built his foundation. The so-called power of a cultivator at that time was extremely laughable now, but to a large extent, many things underground were preserved. This was his luck. He still built a shed, just like what he had done 2,000 years ago. He also did not think about how to repair it, or how to bury it grandly again. His mother did not like this. She liked quiet and less disturbing. The most important thing was the thought. He came back and chatted with his mother here, as if he was closer to his two relatives here. He should have come back long ago. It was just some trivial matters. He would say whatever he thought of, softly reciting it to his relatives in the other world. This was a late sacrifice. His mother and Aunt Kai would not blame him. He knew, but he was blaming himself. It was because he had encountered a problem and needed his mother's help, just like every time he encountered trouble when he was young. Even if you were a half-immortal, you were still raised by a mother. Chapter 1797. Your son is in trouble. Mother, I don't know who I was in the past. Lu Xiaoyi murmured. Who do you want me to be? An ordinary young master from Lu province? A traveler from a different time and space? Or a continuation of some great existence? Of course, he didn't expect his mother to answer him. What he needed here was a special mood in such an environment. Humans were so strange. Different environments could produce different moods. Some things couldn't be understood in the void of the universe, but here, his thoughts were exceptionally clear, as if his mother was by his side. He asked and answered his own questions and confessed his feelings. He knew what his mother would think, just like how his mother knew him. Ever since I came to this body, you've felt the difference, haven't you? Don't lie to me. No mother wouldn't know her son's character. When I started cultivating, you might have completely understood that there must be some reason that changed your son. But you never asked. It's impossible that you never thought about it. You were afraid that if you really asked, you would lose your son? Mother, I didn't know anything at that time. I thought I could deceive everyone, and you would slowly get used to it. But now I know that no mother can accept the fact that her son has fused with another soul. Yes, I am your son, but I'm also not. Some things in this world are hard to explain, but in your son's heart, I've always been your son, and always will be. Lu Xiaoyi let go of his emotions, let his emotions control him, and let his tears fall. This was the first time in his 2,000 years of cultivation that he had let go of his identity as a cultivator to consider problems. He now had only one identity, his mother's son. I know. This kind of blow to you is no less harmful than being exposed to the scorching sun. I'm also a murderer, just like every willful child who unconsciously hurts the person who loves him the most. I didn't understand at that time. I thought everything was flawless. Actually, when you asked my father the question, what you really wanted to ask was this, right? You actually wanted to ask who I am. I'm sorry, Mother. I really didn't understand at that time. I really didn't understand. Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat unable to control himself. These memories from back then were still vivid in his mind. Now that he thought about it, he finally understood the deeper meaning behind it. But at that time, he was still a madman who wholeheartedly cultivated and aspired to reach the starry skies. He thought that he was filial to his mother, but that was only his own opinion. In fact, in his heart, he placed more importance on his own ideals, but neglected the feelings of the people around him. His mother didn't ask him directly until she died. Thinking about it now, he felt as if his heart was being cut by a knife. This was not an isolated phenomenon. In fact, many young people were in such a state when their relatives were still alive. When they experienced life and had their own families and children, they realized it, but it was already too late. Choking, she said, "I'm a foreign soul that doesn't belong to this space-time. No mother is willing to let her child go through all this. You are the same. Therefore, my past shouldn't be like that." This is the wish of every mother. It has nothing to do with becoming good or bad. Your son understands now. I hope it's not too late. In the depths of his soul, something deeply hidden was slowly revealing itself. This was something that he had consciously or unconsciously suppressed for 2,000 years. He suppressed it so much that he forgot about its existence. The so-called past and future were originally things in the category of spiritual consciousness. If you think it exists, it exists. If you think it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. This was the most natural manifestation, not some kind of deliberate memory or forgetting. This new thing was his past, the third part of his past. A past that even a half-immortal couldn't discover. The past of the young master of Lu province. Do you want your son to be the continuation of a great existence? Continue such greatness? Maybe be extraordinary? I know you don't want to. You don't even want your son to be tainted by the legacy of your father, not to mention the great legacy that may change the entire universe and the future of mankind. Your biggest wish is that your son can live well, live a long life, have children, and be free from illness and disaster, right? What is the relationship between the Kingdom of Sunshine and the Lu family? What is the relationship between this planet and the Lu family? What is the relationship between the entire human race and the Lu family? In your eyes, your son is your country, your planet, and your universe, right? Fine. Let's not care about them. Lu Xiaoyi gradually understood his own thoughts as he answered his own questions. When the third part of his past appeared, he realized that he had never been able to erase the real Lu Xiaoyi's consciousness. He had just suppressed it to the deepest part of his consciousness, to the point that he had forgotten about it. Reincarnation was a bullshit Xiantian Dao. He didn't like it. He even rejected the helplessness in the sixth Dao. He valued the present world more. Because he had a mother in the present world. This was something that no one could force him to forget. Perhaps the legend of the sword and fairy was a part of the past. That was all. Perhaps the previous life was a short memory. That was all. As a soul that had merged with many consciousnesses, the most important thing was that there must be a master and a subordinate. Who exactly are you?
Who are you based on?
If you are determined on the present, you will have a definite past. Mother, I am Lu Xiaoyi. I am your son, and I have never changed. I may be muddle-headed sometimes, but in essence, I am the young master of the Lu province, Lu Xiaoyi, that you wish to see. As soon as Lu Xiaoyi confirmed his present, the third segment of the past in the depths of his soul suddenly spread out, covering the sky and the earth. The countless segments of the past of the Lu family's young master and every ordinary person surged out. At this point, he was the same as all the natives of this cultivation world. He also had countless pasts and countless reincarnations, but there were two that were more special. A normal life, a normal past. He was no longer the Lu Xiaoyi who was shocked by the legend of the sword and fairy. He was a Lu Xiaoyi who had the same weakness and the same unbearable. Did he lose it? Perhaps. In the past, no one dared to cut his past, but now they did. Did he get it? Of course. He had truly found his true self. Even without the special past of his previous life, without the mysterious origin of the legend of the sword and fairy, he was still the terrifying Lu Xiaoyi in the universe. He would still walk down the path that he should walk. He would still not hesitate to overturn the heavens. Who said that a cultivator without a glorious reincarnation experience wouldn't have a future? Ordinary ants could still change the heavens and the earth. He had never been so full of confidence in himself in this moment. I am just an ordinary person, a restless young master of the Lu province. I had some lucky encounters and met some miraculous things that helped me on the path of cultivation. But in the end, I am the young master of the Lu province, Lu Xiaoi. Chapter 1798. Mother, do you like me like this? I won't be a celestial sword. I won't be proud of being a transmigrator. I'm a lowly native. So what if I'm a native? I can still pierce through the sky. I have the same ambition. I'm the same fireworks. Must it be a big cigar? Can it be a red double happiness? It was also at this moment that the mysterious aura from the Yongding in the Sparrow Palace moved slightly. Lu Xiaoi immediately understood how dangerous his choice was. That was a mysterious aura from Tai. It couldn't be said to be the only one in the universe, but its function was to evolve the foundation of the universe. It would be of great use to him when he grasped all 36 connate Daos and the era changed. It was a good thing, but there was a prerequisite. The person who activated it had to have a pure spirit and be the same in the past, present, and future. The scope of being the same was very broad. If he set his past in his previous life or that celestial sword, it would no longer be the same. Because he had the experience of being a celestial or having a celestial weapon, he would no longer have the qualifications to enjoy the ancient gifts of the universe. The heavens only gave once, and it would never be repeated. If he set his past in his previous life or that celestial sword, his future could only stop abruptly before he became a celestial. Would anyone reject such a past? No one would reject it. Therefore, this great gift was a huge poison. But the heavens left a way out for people. If you rejected such a great benefit from the past, the heavens would give you a better future. Lu Xiaoi laughed foolishly, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. Mother, you've saved your son again. Even if you were suspicious of me, you never gave up on me. He was very sure that he had been schemed against by others during the trip to the Yongding. Being surrounded and killed was just a pretense. Later on, the actions of the bamboo hat in the anchor chain of the three realms made people think that everything was over. However, the real killer was here. It wasn't to kill, but to cut off your path. As long as you think like a normal cultivator, you are destined to not be able to avoid this disaster. You've unknowingly cut off your future. You don't even know where you've gone wrong. Even a cautious half-immortal like him had fallen into such a trap without knowing it. If he hadn't revealed his true intentions in front of his mother, this wasn't something that the bamboo hat man could have done alone. At best, he was just an executor. Perhaps, he was the kind who didn't know the inside story. This was because the calculation of 3 lives had already exceeded the scope of knowledge of a half-immortal. It should belong to the scope of an immortal. Has the mastermind behind the sword vein finally made a move? It was still very covert, but as time passed, this kind of targeting would become more and more obvious until they finally met shirtless. Originally, he had wanted to take advantage of this battle of Hung River to get rid of this bamboo hat, but now it seemed that he could wait. Let's see if we can find out where the mastermind is from through him. The higher one went, the more complicated the pyramid of cultivation became. Given the character of the ancestors in his sword vein, there were probably many who disliked him, but he couldn't figure it out. There was still time. Lu Xiaoi settled down by his mother's side. Only here did he feel completely relaxed and calm. It was the perfect time to think about those illusory and strange things. For example, his past and present were like ordinary people. There were countless segments, and he had to choose one segment as a reference point. Even if his philosophy was the same as the 3 Qins and he would never use it to be reborn, as a part of cultivation, the past, present, future, self, and transcendence all had to have a conclusion. It was not something that could be casually brushed aside. He treated his past life as a long drama, playing it for himself and for his mother to watch. There were many strange pasts, but they only made her laugh. Until a typical scene appeared.
It was an ordinary life.
The master was talented, but was willing to live in seclusion. He didn't become an official or teach for his whole life. His family was well off and he was kind and charitable. He had a wife and 4 concubines and many children. He died of old age in bed and died at 100 years old. This is the one you like, right? Lu Xiaoyi murmured. Then it's him. An ordinary life also has its ordinary pleasures. With this, he established the point of his past rebirth. He didn't care if he was easily killed. To him, he just wanted to stay in the present world. He didn't care who the enemy was. The three Qins were right. If a swordsman was killed in the present world, what right did he have to stand between heaven and earth? During the establishment of the past, he didn't forget to nag at his mother. Good fellow. 9 children, dozens of grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren. Mother, if this is really the case, will you be able to handle it? With all the people and horses in the world, even Lu province might not be able to feed so many mouths. Lu Xiaoyi's establishment of his 3 lives was almost like a child's play, but he knew that it wasn't a child's play. This choice was the most in line with his intentions. The path of cultivation was long, and everyone had their own pursuits. For the great Tao, for battle, for the sect. But he understood that if he wasn't himself, then all of this would be meaningless. There was one advantage to walking the most ordinary path, and that was that all kinds of tricks from the mysterious realm were useless against him. Now, he no longer needed to overtake cars on bends. If there were too many cars, he might really bend. The establishment of his true self also needed time to polish. In any case, he had nothing to do, so he built a hut and lived here. His state of mind was even more relaxed because he always felt that his mother was by his side, making him feel full of security. Even if one was a half-immortal and the other was just an ordinary human old lady. In essence, this was the relationship between a son and a mother. More than 10 years had passed. These were the happiest, most relaxed, and most unrestrained days of his 2,000 years of cultivation. He and his mother talked about everything. His troubles, his dreams, and his ambitions. His mother had also answered him. Through the wind that blew, the grass that covered the mountains, and the silence of the night, he could understand her, because his heart was clean. To what extent did a cultivator have to cultivate to be able to truly understand himself? It was very simple, but also very difficult. Lu Xiaoyi's past determined that his past was an incomparably complicated process. In the long run, loopholes would be exposed in front of others. In addition to obtaining a powerful past, there would be too many opportunities left. His method of dealing with it was simple and straightforward. Once and for all. The only thing that made him a little curious was, what kind of amazing story was this part of the immortal sword's past? Was it related to the crow ancestor? If those people who treated him differently because of this relationship saw him again, would it be different? Would Jiuyi scold him for forgetting his ancestors? Would Phoenix take back Big Bird Palace? Would Ba Jie still call him senior brother? Would Uncle Zhai still obey his orders? Would Black Dragon still listen to his orders? Would the Dome Swordsman group still listen to his words? He didn't know. But even if there were so many disadvantages, he still chose to be himself. From now on, these 2 strange parts of his past would be hidden among countless other parts of his past. As he became stronger, they would become fainter and fainter, until they could no longer be found, because these 2 parts of his past might not be his real past. Chapter 1799. Lu Xiaoyi did not attract anyone's attention in Pu City. For an essence soul half-immortal, if he did not want to, the few Yuanying patriarchs in the lower 3 stars would never be able to detect his existence. Not to mention those Jin Dan and Foundation establishment cultivators. With just a few tricks, this place would become a forbidden zone. He originally thought that he could accompany his mother like this for a few decades until the collapse of the 13th Great Tao Fragment, but there were always troubles that came knocking on his door. They did not come from the mortal world, but from beyond the heavens. Several large floating rafts descended from the sky and stopped outside the atmosphere. A perfected Lord's divine intent instantly spread throughout the lower 3 stars. Haozhou continent's people are saved regardless of their realm or age. We cultivators will open the door to convenience. Lu Xiaoyi roughly understood what he meant when he heard this. The collapse of the heavenly Tao and the chaos of the universe were not limited to just one place. Only large worlds like the Fifth Ring Heaven's Choice Zhou Xian and Heng He were in chaos. This was a war that could affect the overall situation of the universe's cultivation world. However, other than such a war, there were actually many small conflicts. Taking advantage of the chaos, the reasons were complicated. It could be said that they wanted to gain benefits from the chaos. It could also be that they were cooperating with the large world's surrounding operations. This was not absolute. Because everyone was living in a chaotic era, the large worlds were busy with their own affairs and had weakened their control over their surroundings. This was the best time to take advantage of the chaos. If there was a grudge to take revenge, if there was a grievance to be redressed, if there was a benefit to be taken advantage of, those who had the slightest bit of foresight would do what they could to the best of their ability. Such small conflicts happened every day. Because it did not affect the overall situation, the large worlds did not care about it and were too lazy to care. This caused the cruel wars between the small cultivation worlds to become more and more intense. The battles between the large worlds still followed the rules. However, the battles between the small worlds did not care so much. Their attitude towards the low-level cultivators was very cruel. Everyone knew this, but there was no way to restrict them. This was the characteristic of this era. If there were losses, they would need to be replenished. It was difficult to replenish the large cultivators, but it was relatively easier for the mid-level and low-level cultivators. This was because there were a large number of mid-level and low-level cultivation planets in the universe. There were no large cultivators, but there were countless small cultivators who could be used as cannon fodder. This kind of chaos had been going on for thousands of years. It was becoming more and more frequent, and it was gradually spreading. Even the poor spirit sky region was affected. Under the great chaos, there was no place that was safe. Due to the extreme scarcity of great cultivators, celestial bodies like Lower 3 would not be involved in the cultivation war in this airspace. This was because they could not leave at all, and no one would be willing to attack such a remote place. However, the cultivators here were still meaningful to some in the upper realm who thirsted for strength. In the past, there had been mid-level cultivation planets like Chaowang who would regularly ferry people over. They were also willing to take the bait. There were also many restrictions. The purpose of ferrying people was to develop and strengthen one's own star field, so everyone could accept it and enthusiastically participate. However, in the past 1,000 years, there had been more and more realms coming to ferry people away, and the frequency had also increased. This was not the rhythm of dragging people away to live a good life, but to join the war. No one was willing to be recruited wave after wave like chives being cut. Back then, Chaowang's actions were able to reach a balance between the two sides, but now, the cutting was too deep and too frequent. It had greatly affected the inheritance of the cultivation world in these small realms. Therefore, it had become a nightmare. No matter how tempting the Haozhou upper realm cultivators were in the sky, no one responded. Instead, in the native sects, everyone hid their disciples deeply. This situation had been going on for thousands of years. Even a fool would know what ferrying people was all about. The Haozhou perfected lord was very impatient. A small, broken, low-level planet with few Yuanying dared to be so disrespectful to the emissaries from the upper realm? You people from the lower realm are stubborn. You look down on the upper realm cultivators and resist the heavenly axiom. Are you trying to force me to use tricks to force you out by hiding like a turtle? If that's really the case, you'll lose your dignity. Don't blame me for being rude first. A few lower 3 Yuanying trembled in fear and had no choice but to stand up. At their level, they were like the heavens in their own land. However, under the pressure of a large external force, they were nothing. This kind of elder ancestor was extremely sullen. An old nascent soul helplessly explained, "Upper realm cultivator, please calm down. It's not that we're neglecting the emissaries, but the star domain is barren of spiritual vigor. There are limited cultivators, and we can't afford to recruit them. In just a short 100 years, 3 emissaries, including the noble emissaries, have come and taken away a group at a time. How can there be anyone left? Even if you're cutting chives, you should at least give them a chance to grow again, right? It's not that we don't want to listen, but we can't. Upper Realm Cultivator is wise. Please give us some time to recuperate. When you summon us again, we'll definitely respond. The Haozhou Perfected Lord was clear in his heart. How could he not understand the difficulties of the lower realm? However, he did not want to wait this time. Recuperate? If he really did recuperate, he was afraid that the epoch would be over.
What was the point then?
Along the way, this kind of situation could be found everywhere. These small realms were all making excuses, and not a single one of them was willing to do so. If you're really soft-hearted and don't use any tricks, then don't even think about sending a single person away. He had gained very little from this trip. If he went back like this, he would not be able to report back. Therefore, he had long given up on negotiating. The best way to deal with these ignorant cultivators from the lower realm was to leave them with no other choice. In the beginning, they were polite and courteous, but along the way, their attitudes became worse and worse. There was no other way. If they did not do this, they would not be able to recruit any talents. The lower three realms was one of the last few lower realm star domains in this space.
They had already thought about it.
In order to complete their mission, they might as well capture all the lower three realms in one fell swoop. It was better than leaving a bad name in the entire star domain. They could no longer come here. A few of their crops had already been harvested. They could not even be considered chicken ribs. Those above the Foundation Establishment stage and below the Yuanying stage, including you so-called ancestors, get on the raft. I'll wait for 45 minutes. If you don't come by then, and I take action, it won't look good for everyone. Were they going to eat all the lower three realms dry? For a lower realm, if all the cultivators above the Foundation Establishment stage were taken away, it was equivalent to cutting off the limited inheritance of this planet. The remaining Qi refinement stage cultivators could only rely on themselves in the future. Spiritual opportunity was already very limited. Without a guide, one could imagine how difficult it would be to reach the upper realm. There was another point. If this planet lost the effective restraint of cultivators, those Qi refinement stage cultivators would not care about the taboo rules of the cultivation world like mortals. They would definitely do whatever they wanted. If a war broke out between several countries, who knew how many people would die? Pure cultivation planets would not have large-scale war tragedies. Pure mortal countries also had their own set of methods to govern the world. What they were most afraid of was a world dominated by Qi refinement stage cultivators. It was the most unscrupulous and uncontrollable. All the weaknesses of human nature would be exposed until a new balance was found in the cruelty. Chapter 1800. The Yuanying felt desolate. This was truly a case of sitting at home, yet trouble came from the sky. A small realm like theirs could not escape the waves of the universe's chaos. Even if they did not have the intention to fight for anything, they could not avoid certain things. Being forced to this point, there was no way out. It was not something that could be resolved just by begging for mercy. The upper realm cut off the inheritance of our orthodoxy for their own sake. This is against the rules of the cultivation world. If this gets out, I'm afraid it'll be detrimental to your realm. Although we're 3 stars lower, we still have people who have achieved the Tao. If we become estranged because of this, everyone will lose face. How about this? You and I each take a step back. Based on the total number of cultivators in the star domain, 30% of your realm will be transferred. This is our greatest sincerity. Although our realms are not high enough, we still have the courage to fight to the death. Haozhou's perfected monarch was shocked. Just this sentence alone was enough to show fear. How dare they threaten the upper realm? Someone who has achieved the Tao. You're not messing around in Chaoguang, right? Chaoguang can't even protect itself and obediently boarded my Haozhou's floating raft. What qualifications do you have to meet the upper realm's conditions? Rules? The universe is chaotic, and the rules have yet to be set. Right now, Haozhou is the rule here. The perfected monarch waved his hand, and a few large floating rafts floated down from the atmosphere. A few perfected monarchs stood side by side with him. Another dozen Yuanying stood on the clouds. This was a blatant show of force. In the end, he still wanted to get rid of them without shedding a drop of blood. There are 17 Yuanying perfected monarchs here. I'll give you a chance. Don't you have someone who has achieved the Tao? Pick anyone here and attack with all your might. As long as you can make him take half a step back, my Haozhou's raft team will leave immediately. We won't make things difficult for you. Before he finished speaking, the space paused, and an inexplicable light appeared. Following that, a celestial phenomenon appeared. The leader of the perfected monarchs spoke a lot of nonsense, but he did not expect this to be the result. That ray of light did not dissipate. Instead, it hovered in midair, swallowing the sword chi. The remaining 16 perfected cultivators and nascent soul stage cultivators all felt that the tip of the sword was pointing at them. None of them dared to move. A voice said lightly, "Haozhou, where is that? I've never heard of it." Even the strongest in a region dared to come out and bully the weak while the world was in chaos. Wasn't this letting themselves loose? Which sect master realm are you waiting for?
Tell me about it.
The 16 Haozhou Grand Cultivators felt apprehensive. It wasn't that they were willing to admit defeat, but they still hadn't discovered who the owner of this flying sword was. Where is it? It didn't reveal any aura at all. It was as if the flying sword was a flying sword that could think on its own. Even the sound came from this flying sword. Apart from the nascent soul cultivators, the leaders of the group were all perfected soul cultivators, led by the one who was killed. Since they had reached a certain cultivation level, their foresight was naturally not too bad. Just from the momentum of the flying sword, they knew that it was at least the work of an immortal soul cultivator. As for whether it was from within the realm or outside of the void, they were not too sure. The difference in strength was huge, but fortunately, it seemed that they could still hold their own in terms of numbers. In the cultivation world, face was the most important thing. This person was so fierce and overbearing. How could they admit defeat just like that? Even if he really had such intentions, he would have to puff himself up at his own cost in front of so many people. Therefore, no one answered. They used silence to resist this person's pressure. The flying sword slowly turned and aimed at another perfected soul cultivator. Not going to speak? That perfected cultivator was nervous. In a situation where he couldn't figure out the other party's background, no one was willing to go against an upper realm expert. However, since things had reached this point, there was no room for retreat. He still didn't say a word. However, he secretly circulated his magic power, and the treasured rings around his body were activated. At this moment, his defense was already at its peak. It wasn't just him. The other perfected cultivators beside him were also helping him with his defense. In an instant, light and shadow intertwined, as if his entire person was merged into countless thick shields. With the combined strength of these people, there was probably nothing in this world that could pierce through. If this person made any other movements, his hiding place would definitely be exposed. At that time, whether they fought or retreated, there would still be someone to talk to. The flying sword slowly moved. All the Haozhou cultivators stared at it nervously. They were very clear that if this flying sword attacked someone else, the person receiving the sword would definitely die. However, they were also clear that the punishment for an upper realm cultivator like this would definitely not be directed to the east and hit the west. The flying sword accelerated. The magic power of all the cultivators surged out. There were even some impatient Yuanying who directly attacked the flying sword. However, the Tao realm of the battle space suddenly changed. It was as if all the spells lost the support of the Tao realm and became simple and ordinary spells. However, that flying sword pierced through them. In a battle between perfected cultivators, without the support of the Tao realm, it was a one-sided battle. The second Tao dispelling heavenly phenomenon appeared, causing all the Haozhou cultivators to feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. This time, that mysterious cultivator didn't waste any words. Instead, he turned the tip of his sword towards the third perfected cultivator. His intention was clear as day. They couldn't run. It wasn't just a matter of face. Everyone felt as if their bodies had been planted with a sword parasite. This was the language between cultivators. There was no need for words. Running away meant death. Even if there were 15 of them left, they had no confidence in escaping the pursuit of this terrifying swordsman. The evolution of the Dao realm just now had clearly shown them what it meant to be one-sided. The third In Soul perfected cultivator could no longer resist the mountain-like pressure. Most importantly, there was no point in struggling in front of such a cold-blooded upper realm cultivator. He didn't care about their lives at all. What did it mean if all 17 of them died here? It was worthless. Haozhou's sect master realm is Yangding upper realm. That voice was still indifferent. Do 2 things. Send the cultivators you plundered on the rafts back to where you plundered them. After you're done, return to Haozhou and ask your domain manager to look for Yangding Yangkangzi. Explain the reason and admit your guilt. If you can't do it, or if you have other intentions in the future, I don't mind making a trip to Haozhou to help you remember today's lesson. The sword light flashed and disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never appeared. The 15 Haozhou cultivators had just enjoyed the glory of the upper realm, but in the blink of an eye, they were pressed to the ground and lost their will. There was no need to think. They had bumped into bad luck. It was possible that there was a cultivator from this realm who had made a name for himself in the outside world. It was also possible that a cultivator happened to pass by and stop by. However, this possibility wasn't high. Who was Kong Yangzi? He was the dominant figure behind their backs. To them, he was an existence that they couldn't look up to. Yet this swordsman had mentioned him so casually. Regardless of whether it was true or not, they had really kicked an iron plate this time. They didn't even know who the other party was. They didn't dare to ask. The rule of the cultivation realm was that if you didn't ask, everyone would stop. However, if you had to ask clearly, it meant that there was no end to it. Then, what would be waiting for them in the future? They didn't dare to think about it. Chapter 1801. An old Yuanian cultivator went from trembling with fear to trembling. They didn't notice that a big worm had appeared in the inner realm. This was too rude. Are you Fairy Dai's friend? Thank you for your help. We greet you. They knew their limits. They knew that great cultivators like them didn't like to be disturbed, so they didn't mention anything about meeting them. If they were willing, they would naturally invite them. If they weren't willing, they would at least avoid the awkwardness. They asked this because they had met a perfected monarch swordsman from the lower 3 planets. He was also a sword fairy. Therefore, they naturally thought that he was Fairy Dai's friend. After all, a sword vein was relatively rare in the universe. Unfortunately, there was no reply. It was obvious that this swordsman was too lazy to meet people. He wasn't strong enough and didn't have any local specialties. It was normal for him not to meet him. The lower 3 planets had little spiritual vigor. In the eyes of great figures, they didn't have any practical value. Fortunately, the lower 3 planets had produced a great figure who was still very nostalgic. He just didn't know which realm he had joined. For cultivators like them, who didn't leave their homes, they were blind as soon as they left the atmosphere. They really didn't understand the situation in the universe. The most taboo thing for cultivators was to bite off more than one could chew. Based on your strength and position, you had to consider things. You could either join the great tide of the universe, or live your own life. You could live for 1,000 years, teach some proud disciples, and enjoy the respect of a realm. They were afraid that they would remember things that didn't belong to them. The lower 3 planets cultivators knew what level they were at, so Lu Xiaoyi naturally didn't feel anything for them. What should they say? It was all nonsense. If they were really ambitious, they should walk out of this realm, even if it was a dead end. This was their choice, so he shouldn't interfere. His attitude towards his home planet was the same as Yan Dai's. It was fine as long as it was safe and sound. He would continue to stay by his mother's side and lay a good foundation for his upper realm in the past, present, and future, so that he could deal with any changes in his realm in the future. Strange changes gradually occurred around Pu City. Driven by the power of cultivation, the current dynasty began to govern the Gobi Desert. It was not hard to think of ways to control sand, plant trees, and irrigate canals. What was difficult was whether one had a compassionate heart in their thoughts and consciousness. As the landlords of the lower 3 stars, the Yuanying cultivators, who were extremely familiar with this region, were not completely clueless. From various clues, they were able to deduce that the great cultivators' general hiding place was around Pu City. Now that they had a rough location, of course they wouldn't search every inch of it. That would be too stupid. Hence, the management of the surrounding environment of Pu City came about. They were all smart people. They understood that the higher one's cultivation level was, the more sensitive one would be to the environment. It was just that they were a little too eager for quick success. However, this was a kind gesture, so he couldn't say anything. Here, if the higher-ups wanted to push for something, they would definitely succeed. If the officials didn't work hard, they would replace them. If the dynasty didn't work hard, they would replace it. It was simple and crude. Being in a situation like this, you can't avoid some flattery, especially when it comes to these old foxes. After the confirmation of the 3 lives, his cultivation level began to increase rapidly. His foundation was set, and the framework gradually stabilized. It was much easier to fill in his flesh and blood. When his own 3-live system was complete, it was correspondingly easier for him to see the 3 lives of others clearly. At this point, he finally reached the level of the seniors on the Sword Dao tablet in terms of breaking the 3 lives. If there was a chance, he would compete with them. He was confident that he could defeat Hu Xuedao and Wu Shixing, but he wasn't sure about the 3 Qin Chonglu. As for the Crow ancestor, maybe on this day, when the first ray of sunlight shone into the transparent shed, he realized that it was time to leave. With the perception of a half-immortal and the 12 innate great Daos in his hands, his solid foundation gave him a unique understanding of the changes in the heavenly way. Within 10 years, there would definitely be a great Dao that would collapse. Today, it had been 110 years since he came from the interior world. Mother, Aunt Kai, I'm leaving. I'll come back to see you often in the future. He kowtowed heavily in front of the grave a few times. He didn't pay much attention to such mortal rituals before, but only when he came here did he realize that these most mundane rituals were often the simplest and most sincere. He leaped into the air and shook his divine sense. The entire world was under his divine control, especially the few Yuanying, who were immediately awakened. He had nothing to say. When faced with a group of people from his hometown who didn't have any aspirations, it was tiring to say anything. The most practical thing was to keep some local specialties. He only sighed and shook his hand. Dozens of precious Taoist instruments floated in the air from his storage ring. In fact, he didn't even count them carefully. There was no need to. Time, energy, word count, sensing the mixed aura in the sky, several Yuanying realm cultivators of the lower 3 stars hesitated for a long while before they gathered together. There was no trace of anyone, only a ball of treasure light and purple gas. They had no other choice. It was useless to leave the sword aura talisman behind. Instead, it might bring a fatal disaster to these people. Only these messy Taoist treasures were the most suitable. The few Yuanying were moved. They had been alone in this world for a long time and had never seen the magical effects of the treasures in the outside world. They only felt that each and every one of these treasures could be passed down as a sect's most precious treasure. However, there were dozens of them here. It would be a lie to say that they weren't moved. However, they knew that now was not the time to fight for the treasures. If they didn't do it well, they might lose their lives. The cold-blooded and heartless swordsmen not only extinguished their impulses, but also their subconscious desire to go out and see the world. Finally, the oldest Yuanying opened his mouth and said, "Everyone, I see that the origins of these treasures are different. Techniques, realms of Tao, materials, etc. They must have come from different realms. I'll be honest, I'm afraid that they won't be easy to obtain. Of course, it doesn't matter if these treasures are on Shangxiu. However, it might not be the case if they're on us." Everyone nodded. The situation was obvious. If they used these treasures to fight with others, if they were found out that they came from a familiar place, there would be no reason for them to bear the consequences. The old Yuanying said, "How about this? Shangxiu must have left these treasures here for us. This is, without a doubt. However, we can't be greedy. This is our attitude. Will Shangxiu come back? When will Fairy Dai come back to visit? If we're greedy, I'm afraid it won't end well for us." Everyone was worried. After all, they were all Yuanying cultivators. They had a basic mentality. If that's the case, we'll each take one as our sex heirloom. As for the rest, I see that Shangxiu came from the south of Pu City. He didn't hide it, which means that he's hinting something to us. When we find the land, we'll buy it and build a shrine for Shangxiu's family and elders. We don't need to be grand. We just need to ensure that the whole area is quiet and safe. There's nothing wrong with planting more trees and flowers. Then, we'll enshrine these treasures and send someone to look after them. Every time a Yuanying cultivator in the lower 3 stars advances, they can come here and take one. If we do it well and selflessly, we'll have a future and endless legacy. These were truly the words of an old man. They were indeed flattering the old man. With this combination, when Shangxiu came back, there would only be benefits. There would be no complaints. This was the way to last. Chapter 1802. Lu Xiaoyi leapt up and ran through the beast territory. There were still 10 years left, so he needed to find a large group. He had friends here, Hongyan and Peacock. But he didn't know where the young gods from the various large domains were hiding. Cultivators had a lot of autonomy. He could only roughly designate a space, but he couldn't specify the exact location. There were too many impermanents in the void of the universe, so cultivators had to make their own decisions. You couldn't treat these old monsters that were thousands of years old as your own army of sword soldiers. There were many things that he didn't need to remind. He was sure that as long as he found one young god group, he would find everything. Even if so many young gods from large domains came here, it wouldn't be easy to find them, especially when these old guys were deliberately covering their tracks. But he didn't need to find them himself. It was fine as long as he found Hong Yan and Peacock. "Sister Kong Shi, I'm here again. I haven't seen you for many years. I really miss you." Kong Shi bowed respectfully, but she was speechless. "You're so senior. Is it appropriate to call me sister?" She couldn't take it seriously, so she could only laugh it off. "Lord Lu's visit brings light to my Peacock race's humble dwelling. You're here for that matter, right?" This old uncle or some other messy relatives was really very difficult to deal with. They were born to be a troublemaker. They had only tormented Hengi Domain for a few hundred years, and now they were gathering people to destroy the domain? Of course, she didn't reject it. The Beast Territory and Hengi Domain didn't get along well. Of course, she was willing to get involved. It would be best if Hengi Domain was consigned to eternal damnation. Otherwise, with such a strange and powerful orthodoxy beside her, it was actually very uncomfortable. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "Yes, a friend invited me. Actually, I didn't want to come. Fighting is bad. I hate war the most. Where are these fellows? They're hiding very well. I didn't see any clues along the way." Kong, she curled her lips. This kind of person, he was pretending to be innocent of the things he did. However, what she couldn't understand was how Lu Jun had managed to gather so many Origin Worlds domains. Almost all the famous ones were here. Just from this point, she had to admit that he had deep connections in the Origin World. The Fifth Ring and Zhou Xian's natural selection are in the inverse space. The anchor chain and the float were on the other side of the Hung River, and Hong Yan was in charge of communication. Luo Sutian and Guang Ming were in Chaos Weave. Yangding hasn't arrived yet. Lu Xiaoyi asked, "Where are the ancient beasts?" Kong, she smiled. "They are in the beast territory. I will bring Lu Jun to meet them." Under Kong Shi's lead, Lu Xiaoyi saw the group of immemorial beasts beside the peacock's encampment. The Kuan Prung didn't come, and Xiang Lu didn't seem to be here either. The one in charge here was the Black Dragon head, He Buhui. When they were alone, the Black Dragon leader looked at him. You seem different from before. I don't know if I'm right or not. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Brother Black Dragon, you're right. I have excluded those external things that may affect my cultivation from the 3 lives. Therefore, I may still be the original me, but I may also not be the me in your impression. In that case, will Brother Black Dragon still help me? The Black Dragon leader was surprised. Although they spoke as if they were guessing riddles, they knew each other's meaning very well. After looking at him for a while, the Black Dragon looked up and laughed. I'm not as good as you. Because I wanted to get rid of that guy's influence my whole life, but I couldn't. You could obviously get the benefits of being in a favorable position, but you threw that guy aside. Well done. Well done. If you were just a shadow, we would just be doing our old friendship. But if you threw that guy aside, we can be friends. At least we have something in common, and that is that we hate that guy everywhere. Really hate him? Not necessarily. But they did have something in common, and that was their extreme ego. They would never become someone else's shadow, even if that person was their benefactor, master, elder, guide, or someone they would rather die to protect. But this didn't mean that they were willing to become his shadow. This was the last pride of a soul. Actually, thinking about it carefully, if that guy was in their position, he would probably have thrown this kind of restraint to the side, right? This was that guy's true core philosophy. Without freedom, without ego, without self-respect, he would rather die. So, Lu Xiaoyi throwing away that part of the past was actually learning this essence. The Black Dragon leader sighed, because of this point. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi could be considered to have truly gained the Black Dragon leader's true respect and not treated him as someone's substitute. The main point is the Eternal River. This is the source of the Eternal River realm's strength. Your mission is to enter the Eternal River and destroy their power absorption. But I'll be honest, to do this is not easy. The Black Dragon leader was very clear-headed. I know. Actually, there are many difficulties. How to break through the heaven and earth great membrane. How to clear the Eternal River's inevitable restrictions. This is the specialty of our dragon race. You don't have to worry. Our dragon race can live until now and still prosper. It's not because of luck. Do you know, I've fought side by side with that guy many times. What are his fighting characteristics? Can you imagine? Lu Xiaoyi thought for a while. Wise and powerful, cleansing the demons. The Black Dragon leader spat. Fart. If he can sneak attack, he'll never face it head-on. Sprinkling lime, laxatives, stun people, there's no despicable method that he doesn't use. Those who fought with that guy, half of them were not killed by flying swords, but died of depression. Old Black, I've followed him for thousands of years. The only gain is that I've become less like a dragon. So, mind your own matters. What I should do, Old Black, I'll think of a way. This kind of Black Dragon instead made Lu Xiaoyi feel very assured. The two of them had a secret conversation. When Lu Xiaoyi left, she looked at him with a complicated expression. Lord Lu, do you take my peacock race as friends? Lu Xiaoyi laughed dryly, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't have let them gather at the beast territory. Big Sister Kong, why do you say that? She stared at him, as if wanting to see through what this smiling face was made of. Why was he clearly a human, but he never spoke human language? The ancient beasts came to my beast territory with a majestic aura. But this is just for others to see. To my peacock race, there are still many things that cannot be hidden from us. I only have one question. Where is the main force of the ancient beasts? If you don't want to answer, I won't blame you. After all is fair in war. But I don't want to be kept in the dark. This will decide the deployment of my peacock race, including the great geese and the beast territory's strength. If you need our strength, we have the right to know. Chapter 1803. Lu Xiaoyi smiled apologetically. Big sister, I didn't tell you because the composition of your demon territory is too complicated. But in the end, some things can't be hidden. If you want to know now, you have to keep your mouth shut. including Hong Yen and those big mouths. Kong Shi still looked at him quietly. In the demon territory, the peacock race was famous for their silence. It was the same in the entire universe's cultivation world. This personality came from their inherited bloodline, the phoenix. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Of course he believed in these beautiful creatures. After all, they were his family. We didn't say because we weren't sure. The orthodoxy of Hung River is very special. It's very difficult to mix sand into it. So, we don't know anything about Hung River's response. In war, it's a big taboo to know oneself but not the enemy. Kong Shi was puzzled. What do you mean by we? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I'm talking about the 5 rings. I'm a friend of the 3 pure ones. He's slacking off up there while I'm running around down there. That son of a bitch. The peacock race has always been neighbors with the people of Hung River. Then, in Big Sister Kong's opinion, what are their characteristics? I'm talking about their personality. This guy didn't have a filter on his mouth, calling them Big Sister. But Kong Shi didn't care about these minor details right now. Patient yet arrogant, cautious yet self-righteous. It seems very contradictory. But there's one thing, this orthodoxy is very good at planning. Their strategies are very deep, but when they actually do it, it seems like it's 2 different things, Lu Xiaoyi agreed. That's right. This Hung River has a rash side in their actions, but they also have careful plans. In the end, they might not be very sensitive in terms of strategy, but they have some tricks up their sleeves in terms of tactics. If it was you, and you already vaguely knew 100 years ago that the realm would be attacked, what would you do? Keep waiting? Or plan from many sides? Kong Shi understood. Lord Lu, you're not sure about their response? So you're hesitating here because you don't know if you can capture the main force of Hung River and finish it in one fell swoop? Lu Xiaoyi explained. No one will wait to be captured.
There's no doubt about that.
If it's the 5 rings, our strategy will be to attack. Make the first move and seize the initiative. If they couldn't do it due to time and distance, they would at least do it in the void of the universe, far away from the mother planet. They wouldn't let the enemy come to their doorstep. Apparently, the Hengi realm didn't choose this path. Otherwise, they would have launched a full-scale assault and broken through one of the 3 Yongshin corporations in the alliance. For example, the 5th Ring Zhou Xian's Natural Choice Group, the Luoso Heavenly Light Group, and the Floating Anchor Chain Group. But they didn't do so and instead allowed us to gather around the Hung River. What does this mean? Kong Shi pondered. I can only think of 2 reasons. The reason why Divide and Conquer was able to work in the art of war in the mortal world was because the army in the mortal world had a natural weakness when it came to gathering and transmitting information, as well as the movement speed of the army. This kind of art of war was, in fact, a battle of time. However, it was very difficult to do this in the world of cultivation. Cultivators' mobility and decisiveness were not comparable to that of mortals. Therefore, they were afraid that if they attacked one path, the other 2 would take care of them. Moreover, in the void of the universe, it was impossible to fight a war of annihilation. If they couldn't stop them, they could just run. It was very difficult to completely destroy one path. The other reason was that the Hengi orthodoxy relied too much on their sacred river, so they were unwilling to go out into the void of the universe to fight mobile battles. Actually, if you want to blame someone, you have to blame the sword vein in the alliance. In the universe, who wouldn't be afraid of your famous swordsman army? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. You have a point. We think so too. Therefore, the 3 corporations spread out to lure them to take the initiative to attack. Now it seems that it has failed. The people of Hengi Realm are very calm. Then, will they just wait passively like this? Will they do nothing? Will they entrust their hopes to the will of the heavens? Kong Shi was also thinking about this problem. In fact, she had been thinking about this problem ever since the first Yongshin team came to the Beast territory and heard the shocking news. We can only think of 2 ways. One is to send reinforcements. The other is to use tactics. Lu Xiaoyi nodded inwardly. The peacock race's brains were very useful. Yes. We can't decide on reinforcements for now. This is the core secret of the people of Hengi Realm. But if they gather Zerg and the winged people, the cultivation world of the main world will fall into a situation where everyone wants to beat them up. No matter the result of this battle, Hengi orthodoxy will definitely be targeted by the mainstream in the future. There will never be a day of peace. Then who else? No one knows. This isn't something that can be figured out by guessing. We can only guess at tactics because there are only a few moves. It's either one or the other. There has to be a direction. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. That's why we can't be sure. If we can't be sure, we can't make a decision. We can only secretly arrange things. I can't tell Big Sister because I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or not. Kong, she finally forgave him. Then, what do you think? Lu Xiaoyi said very sincerely, when we were up there, 3 pure ones, and I had already calculated the various changes that could happen once the battle started. Now that Hengi realm is taking the initiative to attack, this Dophicide is completely impossible. Then there's only one option left. Open up a new battlefield. Kong Shi raised his eyebrows. 5th ring? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Yes, the 5th ring. For the Hengi realm, they can see very clearly that the foundation of this alliance is the 5th ring. Once the 5th ring leaves, after a long period of fruitless siege on the Hengi realm, I'm afraid that it will come to an end. This is their only chance to get through this alliance's siege. If they only attack and defend the Hengi realm, no matter how long they last, how can they withstand the endless reinforcements from the major forces of the origin world? Therefore, we think that they will open up a new battlefield in the 5th ring. Their goal is to force the 5th ring forces in the alliance to leave. Then they will join forces and achieve the goal of disintegrating the entire alliance. In terms of tactics, this is the most likely goal. Kong Shi was greatly enlightened. Also, if they are only in the 5th ring battlefield, they will be able to utilize the strength of the Wing clan and the Insect clan openly without worrying that they will be blamed by the mainstream cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi raised his eyebrows. Therefore, there aren't many Yang gods in the 5th ring, and their strength can't be considered tyrannical. Only 2 sword vein Yang gods came to put on a show. Most of the 5th ring forces are preparing for this clash on the battlefield. This alliance was formed by the 5th ring, but we didn't send out our most elite forces. Leaving our allies here, because of some kind of suspicion, was not a pleasant thing to say. That was why I had been thinking about the best time to speak up. I had to wait until everything was clear before speaking up. Otherwise, if I spoke up too early, it would easily cause the alliance to become unstable. Big Sister, please forgive me for thinking about this. If someone else asked me, I'm afraid I would continue to hide it. Chapter 1804. Kong Shi took a deep breath and went through everything in his mind. He opened his eyes and said, Understood. The 5th ring has to focus on the offense and defense of the 5th ring. Ensure that the mother planet is not lost. No matter what the final result is, they won't be able to rush to the Hengi sector in a short time. So, the rest of us are the main force for the Hengi sector's offense and defense? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. It's hard to fake the quantity, so we can only fake the quality. Most of the 45th ring Yang gods are from small and medium-sized sections. There's a gap between their combat power and the top Yang gods. You don't have to worry about their fighting spirit, but I also have to admit that they may not be able to play a decisive role in the main aspects. This requires the others to be more responsible and not blindly place their hopes on the 5th ring. From the perspective of dividing the forces, the 5th ring battlefield will take away some of the Hengi sector's elites. In other words, the forces you encounter in the Hengi sector won't be too unexpected. They'll mainly focus on defense. If the measures are right, even if we can't defeat them and break into the Hengi sector, it's completely possible to suppress them. Kong Shi could understand what he meant. The Hengi sector's breakthrough point would be on the newly opened battlefield. This was the key to ending this war. If this was the case, of course, the most elite forces would be arranged. Just like the alliance sending Yang gods to attack the Hengi sector, the Hengi sector would probably send the real top forces to attack the fifth ring. It was impossible to let the winged Manzurg do whatever he wanted there. What I want to know is, in the end, how much power can we really invest in the Hengi sector? Lu Xiaoyi knew that he couldn't lie about this because it meant the extent to which the beast territory was willing to participate. The 40 young gods of the fifth ring won't return to the mother planet because they have to stay here to maintain the existence of the fifth ring's power. All of Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. The next step is to talk to them about this matter. To get their cooperation, they should also be the most steadfast allies. All of the anchor chains and floating sinks. If we handle this properly, they'll be a great help. Luo Sutian and Guangming, I don't know how far they'll go. But at least they won't betray us because this is the decision of interior heaven. In the end, there will be dozens of interior half-immortals coming down to help you. So as you can see, our strength is actually far stronger than Heng He. You don't have to worry too much.
Kong, she sighed.
Although she said that, her intuition told her that she believed in the fifth ring and the sword vein more. Zhou Xian's Heaven's Choice might have a good attitude, but the problem was their actual ability. They lacked the swordsman's unstoppable and invincible aura. An army must have someone like that in order to bring out the full potential of the entire army. The floating anchor chain could be used as an auxiliary force, but it would be a stretch to expect them to be decisive. Not to mention Luo Su and Tian Guangming. They were able to shout, and they had already won. But to hold on at the crucial moment, that was really tough. In the end, they were forced to come here. During the First Great War of the Universe, they and the Hengi realm were still unknown hidden allies. As for the half-immortals of the interior heaven, why did she feel that they were so unreliable? He couldn't give any concrete reason. It was just a feeling. The main force of the ancient beasts are in the fifth ring. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. That's right. They have an advantage against the winged people insects, as they have a natural spiritual suppression. On the contrary, they will be restricted by the god path system like the Hengi realm. So, we have to place them in the most suitable place for them. Kong, she stared at him. Yangding won't come? Their destination is the fifth ring? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. After the war, the fifth ring will announce to the universe's cultivation world that they will officially apologize to Yangding for the plundering incident in history. They will also compensate for all the losses. Yangding was going to make their future stance clear in this war. He will also have the right to receive the fifth ring's unconditional help when the realm is in trouble in the future. Kong, she shook her head, feeling a little dazed. She had been thinking about this for decades, but he had already started paving the way 100 years ago. Moreover, the amazing thing was that he had actually done it. You really know how to cause trouble. A simple extermination of a realm was turned into a great war by you. Lu Xiaoyi was also very helpless. I don't want to do this either. The key is that this kind of thing can't be hidden from others, and the Hengi realm won't just sit still and wait to be captured. It's not that I'm complicated. It's that the cultivation world is too complicated. Kong, she let out a long breath. All right, in this case, the beast territory will mobilize all of its members. We are closer, so we can send more. Among them, we can also gather 30 to 40 sun god beasts. Lu Xiaoyi bowed deeply. He was very clear about the power of the peacock's promise. These beasts rarely participated in the internal conflicts between humans, but their specialty was that once they participated, they would go all out. They were not as cunning as humans. This was a power that could be relied on at critical moments, not just for show. This was the reason why he was the first to explain to Kong Shi.
Good.
History will prove that your choice was not wrong. The Black Dragon race will act together with you. In terms of bloodline, there will be no separation between you. Also, that Black Dragon head is a bit perverted. If there's anything, you can discuss it. For a orthodoxy like the Hengi realm, sometimes you need to, not be too old-fashioned. Kong Shi understood what he meant. That was, don't be too square in battle. You need to be unscrupulous and break the limits of shamelessness. In this aspect, The peacock race was not good at it, and Hong Yan was not good either. They could only rely on the black dragon head. She was a bit unwilling, but her long life made her understand that Lu Xiaoyi was doing this purely out of good intentions. Whether it was for the so-called face and tradition, or for the lower casualties, the choice was not difficult to make. Where will you stay? This was what she was interested in. Although she felt that this relative was not very reliable when she first met him, after thinking about it, she couldn't help but be impressed by this person's powerful strength, far-reaching plans, and ruthless methods. Lu Xiaoyi was a bit distressed. This is what I'm worried about. It seems like there's a reason to stay on either side. If I stay on the fifth ring and break their dream of dividing the battlefield, I'll naturally take care of the Hengdi realm. If I stay here, I'll directly attack the Hengdi realm. Then their so-called dividing the battlefield would be meaningless. There's no clear priority. Actually, the best way is to see the strength of both sides. Wherever the Hengdi realm is weak, I should go there to fight for a quick solution. But who knows the layout of the Hengdi realm? Where is the center of their strength? A war that has been planned since 100 years ago. No matter how much I calculate, I still don't understand the result. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have invited anyone. Just a 5-ring Yang God's 100-year attack and directly catch them off guard. Kong, she shook her head. No, you won't do that. Because doing so may achieve the most perfect surprise in terms of tactics, but your fifth ring will lose its strategic purpose. If you can ambush others today, others will ambush you one day. In the end, it will become a world of ordinary people who like to fight. There will be fewer and fewer friends around you, so few that even our peacock race won't dare to get too close to you. Is this what you need? Therefore, it may be very difficult, but with the glorious momentum in hand, the more friends you fight, the more allies you have. This is the trend of the world. The battle of the universe is a process. It's a competition of who can laugh in the end, not just for a moment. Chapter 1805. Outside the fifth ring, there was a desolate star a few months away. From afar, it looked no different from an ordinary desolate star, but only when one got close to this desolate star could one understand its mysteries. On the sunless side of the desolate star, in the bumpy giant craters, there were also densely packed cultivators. 30 Yang gods and hundreds of Yin god primordial soul true lords were almost all of Yang Ding's strength. Yang Ding domain, after being entangled with a fifth ring for nearly 2,000 years, finally made their final choice in the chaos of the universe. They chose to stand with the strong. They chose to forget their hatred and focus on the future. There were too many reasons for this. Compared to the main world's Buddhist orthodoxy, the power of the fifth ring was as strong as ever. Half-immortal monsters appeared one after another in the fifth ring. The tacit agreement of several main worlds, including the inverse space's Heaven's Choice continent, and so on, were all subtly influencing their views. They weren't blind, and they saw these changes in their eyes. In fact, it was only natural for them to stand on one side. The only thing they lacked was face. Now, the fifth ring gave them face. The fifth ring monsters solved the deep-rooted problem of the domain for millions of years for them. The higher-ups of the fifth ring agreed to clear their names and admit their mistakes. Such an opportunity would only come once. There wouldn't be another one in the future. And this time, it was time for them to prove themselves. If you want to get the respect of others, you have to show the corresponding ability. Kong Yanzi and Yu Yang stood in the sky above the desolate star, filled with emotions. Looking at the huge fifth ring domain in the distance, it was like a monster floating in the void, hideous and ugly. It was once a nightmare that they couldn't get rid of. They thought that one day they would come with their troops, but they never thought it would be in such a way. Life was like a dream, and cultivation was really a drama. Even the boldest screenwriter wouldn't dare to write such a story, right? But in the world of cultivation, such changes were happening all the time. It was challenging the bottom line of humanity.
Soon, right?
I'm getting a little anxious from waiting. As the helmsman of Yang Ding, Kong Yongzi had always been known for his calm and wise demeanor. He would only occasionally show a trace of his true nature in front of his senior brothers who were older than him. Yu Yang didn't look at him. After thousands of years of friendship, they were too familiar with each other. In these few years, I have a hunch. It should be the great Tao of Buddhism. There are only a few, so there's no need to guess. Kong Yongzi laughed. Senior Marshall Brothers' premonition has always been the most accurate. So, in your opinion, is it a blessing or a curse for us to attack Yongding this time? Yu Yang was very serious. Do you really want me to guess? You might not be satisfied. Kong Yongzi's heart tightened. Is it a disaster? Yu Yang, however, shook his head. It's either one or the other. Your mentality is wrong. Actually, there is a third possibility, which is where my intuition lies. This time, we may not be in the main direction, and we may not be able to play a decisive role. Kong Yongzi was speechless. This guess was indeed terrible. He had come in such a menacing manner, only to pounce on nothing. He couldn't even find a place to exert his strength. This was not what he wanted. The two of them remained silent as they looked at the starry sky. In the cultivation world, who could predict the outcome until the very end? In most cases, the answers given by the heavenly Tao were always unexpected. In silence, time passed quietly, and a small planet floated over from outside the desolate planet. It was a gaseous planet. There were all kinds of strange things in the void of the universe. Planets were not necessarily solid. There were also gaseous or liquid planets. Their unifying characteristic was that they were huge in size, but their mass was not necessarily the same. Inside the planet, wonderful changes were happening all the time. Because the fifth ring was moving, the meteorite that Yang Ding and the other cultivators lived in moved together under the attraction of the fifth ring. So, in fact, they couldn't figure out whether the planet was moving or they themselves were moving. Such a planet was not rare in the void of the universe. As Yang spirit cultivators, the two of them didn't feel much novelty about it. The reason why they paid attention to it was because they both felt something special. There was a cultivator on that gaseous planet. Many cultivators chose to cultivate in extreme celestial phenomena. They challenged their limits in such a dangerous situation. But now this cultivator on the planet was obviously more daring. This was not just cultivation but the upper realm. Not only was he in the upper realm, but he was also dragging a Yang spirit void beast with him. This position was already very close to the fifth ring. No void beast would easily set foot here. When the behemoth of the fifth ring flew close, as long as they were not stupid, they would choose to leave and hide. The appearance of the Yang spirit void beast here was very strange, but what was even more strange was the cultivator, who was in the upper realm. Was this the right environment? The two Yang Ding Taoists didn't move. Thousands of years of cultivation had already made them lose the so-called curiosity. Their only purpose was to hide themselves well and appear at a suitable time in the future where they were needed the most, not to be a hero for a certain idea. So, they just watched and didn't have any intention of intervening. As they watched, the distance was getting closer and closer, and they could make a basic judgment about the changes inside the planet. Reincarnation. It's the Tao of reincarnation. This person is using it to climb up the primordial spirit. Kong Yongzi was a little envious. Yang Ding's choice of cultivators over the years had been relatively simple. Limited by the environment, he couldn't let 100 flowers bloom. However, this situation would change in the future. Only when there were more ways could a realm be powerful. The Yang God Void Beast was constantly in attack mode. Such a dangerous upper realm method was not recognized by the mainstream. It was a risk. It was completely a joke with life. The environment wasn't right, and there was also external harassment. Using a Yang Spirit Void Beast to sharpen his own reincarnation realm, if he didn't control it well, he would fall into true reincarnation. They couldn't move because a Yang Spirit Void Beast appeared here, and it was very likely that it had other purposes. For a cultivator legion, hiding was always the first element. They watched for another year and regarded the asteroid as a large planet. The distance between them was very close. Until one day, the internal gas of the entire asteroid underwent a violent change, as if a storm had erupted. Even the entire shape of the planet was changing. At this moment, there was a sword whistle, and then endless sword light gushed out from the asteroid. The young spirit void beast probably felt that something was wrong and desperately tried to break free, but it was torn to pieces under the extremely sharp sword light. Yu Yang and Kong Yangzi looked at each other and suddenly understood. It was indeed a sword lunatic. Even an upper realm cultivator had chosen such a crazy method. The void beast turned into nothingness, and a clear voice sounded, "If the spirit is willing, we will meet again in the next life. If the spirit is willing, take me back to Xian Yuan." Chapter 1806. A sword light leaped out of the planet, glanced at the desolate star, and then left. Looking at the direction, it was the fifth ring not far away. Kong Yangzi was stunned for a long time, and then he shook his head and sighed. Such a person and a woman. Many men can't compare to her heroic spirit. There are many such people in the fifth ring. Brother, it seems that we made the right choice. Yu Yang was silent for a long time, and then he smiled bitterly. Don't worry, as long as our Dofra is right, such a person will appear in the sun top one day. Kong Yangzi said again, this person's upper state seems a bit strange, and it's not completely primordial spirit. I always feel that there's something wrong with it. This time, it was Yu Yang's turn to sigh. There's nothing wrong with your feeling, because this female swordsman not only reached the upper state of primordial spirit, but she also took a step forward. Kong Yangzi was speechless. The sword vein produced two monsters? Could it be that after the change of the universe era, the next rebirth of the universe would be the first year of the sword vein? Since she was a swordsman and appeared in this place, she must be from the sword vein. It didn't matter whether they were discovered or not. They were in contact with the fifth ring, so they could cooperate tacitly when something happened. Not to mention the two Yang Dingyang gods sighing. The sword light was rushing and whistling. If she didn't do that, she wouldn't be able to express her feelings. Breaking the realm was relatively dangerous, but for Yen Cheng, it was a step she had to take. She didn't want to wait any longer, and she didn't want to put everything on other people's shoulders, even if it was her closest brother. Over the years, she had been reflecting on herself. Why did her originally cheerful personality become more and more radical? Other people's state of mind became more and more stable as they cultivated, but she was the opposite. Before she built her foundation, she was a gentle little girl, and after she built her foundation, she became known for her straightforwardness. When she was in Jindan, she was very self-conscious, and when she was in Yuanying, she had become a big sister. Outside the dome, except for one of her brothers and sisters in the same realm, the others subconsciously regarded her as the leader. This was a kind of temperament, and it wasn't entirely because of strength. Until true monarch, she resolutely came to the azure sky and began to do as she pleased. Now that he had reached the immortal soul stage and even taken a step forward, he finally understood why all of this was happening. She was a reincarnated body, and one that reincarnated frequently. That was why she had different insights on the great Tao of reincarnation. Even after being reincarnated several times, he was still the same person. His true spirit had never abandoned the sword vein, completing a qualitative leap. In her past cultivation, the highest cultivation level she had ever achieved was primordial divinity. Now, she had reached that level and even surpassed it. Countless memories surged into her mind, and she understood her current situation, the situation at the dome. This was also the heavenly Tao's reward for not abandoning her. This was her talent, as well as her willpower. Why was she able to successfully take a step forward this time, instead of running into a wall back and forth between the true monarch level like before? He hadn't been able to figure it out in his previous lives, but now that he had taken this step, he finally understood. This time, no one had exerted any additional influence on her growth. If there is one, it would be a perverted guy who would always show off in front of her with bad intentions. She had never stopped wanting to catch up with him and beat him up. In reincarnation, it might not be a good thing to have the help of close old friends of the sect. Unfortunately, the swordsmen didn't understand this very well. They were always especially enthusiastic towards their old friends who had returned. It had been 20,000 years. She could finally truly contribute to the sect. She was no longer a dispensable character among the large group of swordsmen, leaving behind the reputation of having an unchanging reincarnated heart, but in reality, she hadn't really made any significant contributions. This was the will of the heavens, and also her own perseverance. In this turbulent era, when she was needed the most, she had returned. However, how many of those old friends of hers were left? Memories surged into her mind, but at the same time, they brought with them endless sadness. She somewhat understood Li Wei's actions back then. When you don't have those familiar faces by your side, only endless loneliness and sadness would remain in the depths of your heart. Sadness was unavoidable, but it had to be passed as soon as possible, because the sword veins still needed her. When she took this step, coupled with her experience as a Xianyuan swordsman and the changes in the universe in the past few hundred years, she had her own judgment. A judgment that was not the same as others. Lu Xiaoyi. This little macaque had done a good deed. He was even more troublesome than Li Wei back then. The key was that she had to clean up this macaque's mess. On Crow Peak, a few young gods were in a meeting. Guandu and Guangbo were the ones leading the team to Hengdi Boundary. The rest were led by Guanshan, Heku, Gongyao, and Shangting. This was a necessary division. Guandu had to go. If he didn't go, Xuanyuan's alliance this time would be too fake. The plan had been drawn up 100 years ago, and it had been refining for 100 years. There were also many boundaries close to the fifth ring that were secretly mobilizing here. It was better to be safe than sorry. Before the battle at Hengdi Boundary, anything could happen. War was a cautious art. It was not something that could be solved by rushing and fighting. The power of the fifth ring had actually been weakened after the last great battle. The elites that had been lost could not be replenished in just a few hundred years. Moreover, 40 young gods had gone to Hengdi Boundary this time. Even if most of them were young gods from small and medium-sized sects, the division of power was inevitable. Another thing was that they had no intention of giving up on the blue sky this time, so they had made arrangements in the blue sky, especially the 3 pure ones and Xianyuan. The Yang spirit was not here. It was to preside over the blue sky, just in case something unexpected happened. Their strength had decreased, and they had to divide their forces twice. This made the Xianyuan people very depressed. 2 great battles. One was passive, and the other was active. Why do I feel so uncomfortable every time? Why do I feel like I can't enjoy myself to the fullest? Have we regressed, or was the Xianyuan of Crow ancestors' era too strong? Heku complained. Because he could not go to Hengdi Boundary, he had been complaining endlessly for 100 years. Among the swordsmen present, there were many who had the same thoughts as him. It was just that he was the first to speak. Guanshan snorted. Be careful with your words. Don't casually compare the present with the past. How can they be compared? In Crow ancestors' era, the universe was not in chaos. Even the Celestial Wolf expedition was just a slightly larger realm war. How can it be compared to the current universe war? How many powerful realms of the universe were involved? How many are there now? The entire eastern elephant sky was involved, including the northern elephant sky and the interior sky. What kind of concept is this? You all know the history very well. It is recorded clearly. Even if the Celestial Wolf expedition is bragging about how great it is now, how many mistakes were made, how many people were lost. In the Battle of the Asteroid Belt, almost 50% of them were lost. Later, in order to boost morale, they boasted that it was unprecedented. Back then, Lu ancestors said that it was just a messy invasion. They only won because they had the upper hand. However, the process was full of mistakes. This is also the truth. Chapter 1807. Everyone was speechless. History was always beautified and distorted as time passed. However, as the top level of Xianyuan, they shouldn't be misled. Guanshan didn't let them go. Do you know how many five-rings Sword Vane lost in the counterattack of Sirius because some half-immortals came from the interior world? Later, Crow Ancestor admitted his responsibility in his autobiography that he didn't control the rhythm of the battle. I want to make it clear to you that in the cultivation world, there is no such thing as cutting melons and vegetables. If you think this way, then it means that the thousands of years of prosperity have made you hallucinate. There has never been a smooth sailing in the cultivation war. Uncomfortable? That's right. If you don't feel uncomfortable when you want to slaughter a world and destroy a Dao, then our five rings, our sword vein, should have unified the universe and become the only voice of the universe. Is it realistic? Do you think others cultivate fake Dao? Guanshan said earnestly, don't think that the entire universe is five-ringed and belongs to us. In this chaotic era of the universe, we will continue to endure such discomfort. This is the essence of a great battle. Looking down on all the mountains?
Dream on.
Do you think you are writing a novel? Ruling the universe and all the worlds will come to you? As long as we walk on the right path of competition and always keep the same direction, then such discomfort will become less and less. Suffering losses is not scary. What is scary is that you don't know why you suffered losses. You think it was your own carelessness, that it was a coincidence, that it was lax. Last time we suffered losses because of the strength of our opponent. In this cultivation world, we can't take everything as we please. It's that simple. They had to admit that Guanshan was a sensible person. He was very clear about Xuanyuan's position. Crow Ancestor's greatness lay in himself and not the entire Xianyuan sword vein. It wasn't enlightening because no one could be enlightened. This was just a normal conversation between them. Some wanted to be more carefree, while others wanted to be calmer. As they expressed their opinions, they felt an aura approaching. Crow Peak didn't set up any defenses against monarch-level cultivators. In fact, there was no special forbidden area on the dome except for Xuanyuan's scabbard. However, it wasn't the few primordial spirits they were familiar with, but a Kuan cultivator who rarely came here. He had already ascended to the primordial soul stage. There was also a trace of an indescribably strange aura. The Yang gods were stunned for a moment before they were overjoyed. Xianyuan was starting to show his strength in the second half of the game. Monstrous geniuses appeared frequently. To tell the truth, that fellow Lu Xiaoi was really too good at stirring up trouble. Although this kind of person was full of vigor and dared to fight, as the leader of a sect, in the end, he still wasn't reliable enough. Now that two people from Xianyuan had taken the first step, and they were both in the primordial spirit stage, they could make up for each other. Through discussion, there would be restraints, and they could remind each other to not let this big ship of Xianyuan sail into madness. They had all been Yang spirits for thousands of years. It was hard to say whether they could take that step before the end of the era. Right now, the ancient method was flourishing, but to them, whether or not they could make this turn was a problem. When the era changed, Xianyuan would definitely be led by these two people. It would be much more stable than if there was only one person. Shang Ting was the first to speak. Junior sister Yanqing has peeked into the Great Way. Congratulations. Such an achievement makes us blush with shame. Yanqing returned the greetings one by one. Her mood was complicated. Once upon a time, when she had successfully reincarnated for the first time, she had seen familiar figures. That touching and anticipation had been unparalleled. She had only thought that she could fight side by side with everyone again. But now, these fellow disciples were still familiar, but it was a different feeling. She walked to the seat of honor and said in a firm tone, "I have an objection to the plan. It needs to be changed." The Yang gods were very surprised. This was not in line with the rules. Although the primordial spirit could already compete with them and had endless potential in the future, at the moment, such a realm was actually only on par with the Yang gods. Her combat strength might not be as good as theirs, so how could she dare to boast so shamelessly? Even that madman Lu Xiaoyi had never dared to put on such airs in front of them. He had to be respectful and respectful to his seniors. Was this woman too happy to succeed in the upper realm that her brain had been fried? There was always a process for the transfer of power. Even if Lu Xiaoyi held the broken sword, it was still the same, not to mention that this woman's ability and contribution were far inferior to Lu Xiaoyi's. Guan Shan reacted the fastest and immediately understood. This time, it was not a salute between peers, but a great salute to an elder. Congratulations to senior sister Bu Lian for returning to Xianyuan. We are all your juniors. We have listened to your story and cultivated all the way here. If you have any errands, please tell us. The remaining few also understood. Lu Zhu was looking for senior sister Bu Lian's reincarnation. This was no secret to the Yang gods. But they didn't expect that it would be this Yanqing. They didn't know why, but by a freak combination of factors, she was left out. Perhaps this was also the reason why Lu Zhu hadn't returned to the mountain in the past 2,000 years. Knowing that it was this great aunt, they had originally thought that Xianyuan would go more smoothly. This great aunt had always been known for being swift and decisive and unscrupulous in the history of Xianyuan. In the past few reincarnations, there were still people above who could suppress her. But now, other than that Lu Xiaoyi, who could make her give in? A big scourge, and now a crazy woman. What should they do? Yanqing didn't care what they thought. Her personality had never changed even after several reincarnations. She was straightforward and never hid anything. Lu Xiaoyi was right to attack Hung River. His strategy was right, but his tactics were bullsh*t. In the end, after 100 years of planning, he still made his hometown unstable. It was clearly an initiative, but now it has become passive. Tell me, isn't this? Everyone nodded and agreed. That's right. Lu Xiaoyi is bullsh*t. Yanqing continued to show her power. You guys are the same. You let him mess around. Don't you know how to fill in the gaps? I even have to wipe his ass for him. Let's cut to the chase. In my opinion, the real goal of Hung River Jia may not be the fifth ring. The fifth ring is so big and has so many cultivators. How can it be so easily shaken? If they really set their goal here, the first thing they need is a huge number of cultivators. Hung River Jia can't even protect itself. Where can they find so many people? Without a large number of human cultivators, can they just rely on those winged insects? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yanqing didn't hold back. You might not have thought of these problems. It's not like they haven't appeared before. Why didn't you remind me? Because you weren't sure? Or did you not dare to take responsibility? When did Xuanyuan's yang spirit become afraid of making a mistake and not even dare to speak out for his own face? Even if he, Lu Xiaoyi, has the broken sword head, can he call the shots? If he does something wrong, I'll take away his broken sword head and make him face the wall to reflect on his past. These words are the same to me. Just because I reincarnated a few more times, you treat me like an ancestor? I'm just a junior who just entered the Essence Soul realm. You should talk and teach me a lesson. What does past experience have to do with this life? She smashed the star map. Here. Blue sky. This is their real goal. Now, tell me your opinions. I don't listen to flattery. I only respect honest people. Chapter 1808. The blue sky was still beautiful. If you could relax, your beauty would increase by 3 points. The ice guest swordsman was lying on the beach of a beautiful island in the Thousand Islands region, feeling that life was so beautiful. The sun was shining, the sea breeze was cool, the sky was blue, and the shadows of the sails were dancing. On the beach, there were laughing beauties playing and running. In the Thousand Islands region, which was originally a very open place, on this private beach, was there anything more pleasant than this? Under the palm trees behind the beach, several people were preparing a barbecue. Fresh spirit beast meat, chilled wine. Most importantly, the long life cycle allowed him to incomparably enjoy all of this. Since he succeeded in becoming a supreme in the Swanee treasure ship, his life suddenly became happy. He stayed in the blue sky, standing aloof from worldly affairs. He could do what he wanted to do, and did not have to bear those endless tasks. Here, he was the top existence, enjoying the envious gazes of many practitioners. Therefore, he bought an island here and became the owner of the island. Of course, he could only come here for 2 months in a year. For the rest of the time, he had to report back to Shao Mountain. Originally, he could stay here and enjoy life for the whole year. However, ever since senior brother Zhizhong came, he became more strict. Fortunately, he could still take a break for 2 months and relax the inexplicable tension that came from nowhere. Nervous for nothing. I'm someone who has seen the world. Since the First Five Rings War, the East Heaven Main World's Buddhism ran into a wall here. Whether it was the people of the Five Rings world or the people of the Blue Sky world, they became very confident and pride returned to them. For a supreme like the Ice Guest Swordsman, it was not that he did not know the chaos of the universe, but he also knew the painful changes before the arrival of the new era, but this seemed to have nothing to do with him. He was just a supreme who was matured in the Swanee treasure ship and was destined to have no fate with the upper realm. In the remaining 1,000 years, the universe might not be able to undergo earth-shaking changes, and some small troubles would not be able to affect this place. Could he find a stronger enemy than the East Heaven Main World? So, for him, the most important thing was to enjoy life. He wasn't that ambitious. Speaking of which, with his strength, he really couldn't support too high of an ambition. It would be better for him to play some small games that everyone liked to play under the bright and beautiful sun with some sensible and tactful beauties. Here, he was the king. Not only this small island, but also the Thousand Islands region. There weren't many who dared to talk to him directly. Safety, safety, they had always emphasized safety. For hundreds of years, the wolf had come countless times, but he had never seen the real thing. He had long gotten used to the rhythm of scaring himself. As the sea breeze blew, he gradually felt sleepy. This was azure sky. Not just anyone would dare to come here and act presumptuously. There was no need to be so tense all the time. Sleeping like a mortal was his favorite thing to do. While he was half awake, he vaguely sensed a presence passing by above the island. This was very normal. There were many cultivators here, and he was not so overbearing as to ban flying above the island. Occasionally, strange cultivators with unknown backgrounds would come here to cause trouble, and he could still pretend to be a nobody and live a good life. If you don't pretend to be strong in cultivation, you'll be struck by lightning. But this presence paused above the island. This was normal. The island was very beautiful. How could the things that he, Ice Guest Sword, had his eyes on be bad? But what happened next was not normal. Sensing the fluctuation of spiritual vigor, huge waves of more than 10 feet high rose up from the shore, like a tsunami rolling towards the shore. The beauties screamed and fled in all directions. The heaven-like place instantly became a place of devastation for nature. Ice Guest's sword did not dodge. What was the significance of a tsunami to a supreme like him? It was just to wash his face. He did not even release his divine sense to wake the other party, afraid that this reckless fellow would run away. He had to be washed by water, then he would have a reason to pretend to be a nobody and teach this arrogant fellow a lesson. The huge waves came as expected, washing away the beauties, and even the barbecue rack behind the palm tree. Ice Guest's sword did not move, and did not even open his eyes. But in his heart, he was angry. Did they think that he, Ice Guest's sword, had a good temper? Then a voice scolded, "I'll beat you up. Why are you still pretending to be a big turtle? Get up quickly and follow me back to the mountain." Ice Guest's sword jumped up. Because he heard the voice, he could no longer pretend. The other party was the same as him, a true swordsman of Shenyuan. After thousands of years of entanglement, they knew each other very well. "Young Manly, I'm on vacation. Don't bother me with those trivial matters. The rules of Mount E are that I have the right to take a 2-month vacation. You have no right to order me around." The figure in the sky ignored him and left, leaving behind a voice.
There's a message from Mount E.
Big Sister will be here soon. It doesn't matter if you go or not. But when you're in trouble, don't expect me to plead for you. Ice Guest's sword was shocked, and he jumped up and ran. As he ran, he transmitted his voice to the front. Big Sister is coming? Big Brother didn't come, right? But no matter who comes, I think our good days are coming to an end. This time, I'm afraid we won't be able to keep our lives.
Why are you running so fast?
Wait for me. The two of them flew all the way. When they neared the sky above the north region, they saw sword traces flashing in the sky. Everyone was running back with all their might. They were very clear that Senior Brother Zhizhong was only here to preside over the daily affairs and to guard against any danger. There might not be a real battle. But if the Dome sect continued to send people, then it was not just a possibility. There would definitely be a big battle. Only Big Sister is coming? Ice Guest's sword still had a glimmer of hope. Li Peinan looked at him contemptuously. I don't know. I heard that more than 10 floating rafts came. They were all filled with people. Or maybe it's Big Sister's dowry. Ice Guest's sword complained in his heart. The Dome sect had sent people over.
This was not a small fight.
They were going to be serious. Damn it. Why was it so hard to enjoy life? Just as the two of them and the other true immortals and nascent soul cultivators returned to the territory of Mount Shao, the atmosphere in the distance began to tremble violently. Ripples were stirred up on the surface of the heaven and earth. Amidst the turbulence of the spiritual vigor, one after another, enormous ships rushed out from the clouds and headed straight for Thousand Elegance Peak. These were treasured ships, not ordinary floating rafts. It was not a small group that returned, but the main force. Ice Guest's sword chattered. Youngly, when we return, let's go and ask Big Sister if the fifth ring is still lacking people? Why don't we ask that last Xiaoya first? I don't think it's good, very bad. Youngli was furious. If you want to ask, go ask. Why should I go and make a fool of myself? Since a few decades ago, I have been asking you if we should return to the fifth ring together? There are many thighs there. King said it was safe here, and there was no battle at the rear. Now, no one will be able to escape. Chapter 1809. The people coming from the dome were more orderly than the two of them had imagined, which meant that the situation was more serious than they had imagined. Not only did Big Sister Yan Cheng come, there were also a few Sun Spirit Supremes. This was almost all of Xuanyuan's strength. The big shots still had a lot of important things to discuss, and the small shots had their own ways. The two of them quickly found the beautiful Supreme Xiaoya, but now they had to call her Senior Sister. Senior Sister Xiaoya, I missed you so much. Do you still remember the fun we had when we went on a trip together? Of course, Ice Guest would not go straight to the point. Instead, she first tried to make friends and talk about the past. Li Sheng was disdainful. Xiaoya, ignore him. There are not many people who can live until now after knowing this guy. If it weren't for me, people like him who can destroy their masters and ancestors should be hanged on the snow mountain. To warn others. Although he was scolding, he was actually reminding Huang Xiaoya that he had saved her many times. At the critical moment, he had to help them. Huang Xiaoya shook her head and smiled bitterly. It was a miracle that these two clowns could survive until now. Their talents were limited. They could still survive in Qingkong, but it was normal that they could not show their abilities at all when they reached the dome. Because in the end, they relied on the realm on the Swan and I treasure ship and the opening of the Tao of Heaven, so in terms of strength and mentality, they could not reach the level of a normal Xianyuan swordsman. There were many such people in Xianyuan's sword sect. The two of them were a little vague. She knew that this was mainly because of their personality. Some people were afraid of difficulties and easy. In fact, they did not really want to be deserters, but because they lacked confidence, they always wanted to take on easier tasks. All right, you two don't have to pretend to be pitiful here. Let me tell you, Sister Yen judged that the direction of the enemy's attack could still be Qing Kong. Therefore, after the discussion, the higher-ups of the Fifth Ring reached an agreement. It was not easy to command or coordinate the reinforcements, so they simply let the Xianyuan sword sect return to Qing Kong and have the power to mobilize the entire left Zhou star system. The Fifth Ring was defended by other sects, so the dome was actually empty. The two of you can't go back either. The decision to choose the 5 rings was a combination of many factors, a result of weighing the pros and cons. In fact, it was difficult to make a clear bias between the blue sky and the 5 rings. After all, this was not everyone's home planet. It was only the headquarters of the 3 Pure Ones and Tai in Xianyuan. Smoky N's judgment did not receive everyone's approval. In the eyes of many Fifth Ring people, as an old planet that had long since become history, it was inappropriate to place too much emphasis on the significance of blue sky. However, the blue sky 3 factions' insistence had already been seen. Therefore, they had no choice but to compromise. The initiator, Xianyuan Sword Sect, would be solely responsible for the direction of the blue sky. The 3 pristine ones and Tai ones would still focus on the 5 rings. This was the most appropriate decision. It would be better for one sect to act alone than to gather some people from each sect. The swordsman was the most suitable orthodoxy for this task. In such a situation, no swordsman could stay out of it. Of course, no one thought that way either. It was just that some people had lived a comfortable life for too long and were trembling in fear. After talking for so long, who exactly is our enemy? Iced Guest's sword was very vague. They were in blue sky and did not have much information. They did not have enough control over the overall situation of the universe. Of course, the main reason was that they did not care at all. People of Hengi. Yes, this is the main body. We can't rule out the involvement of the Winged Ones and Zerg. Which one do you like? Huang Xiaya asked with a smile. Iced Guest's sword was dumbfounded. People of Hengi? Never heard of them. I don't like any of them. The humans are too cunning, the Winged Ones are too cruel, and there are too many insects. Huang Xiaya shrugged. Actually, we've only heard of them, and have never seen them. It's all the same. However, Senior Brother Liu has made a small booklet of the characteristics of Hengi orthodoxy. There are more detailed introductions inside. You guys can go and get a booklet later. This is a life-saving item. Don't be careless. Iced Guest's sword let out a howl. As expected, it's still Master Lu's doing. I knew it. If Master Lu doesn't kill for a day, his whole body will itch. The bigger the scene, the more excited he gets. Young Li, I don't know if you and I can survive this. Young Li gritted his teeth. My life is in my hands, not the heavens. Yen Chung directly led this time's reinforcement operation. It wasn't entirely because she had stepped into the next realm, but because of the keen sense of war that she had honed through several lifetimes. She had a deep understanding of the post-Crow era. She had also gone through countless life and death situations and fought side by side with those legendary figures. She had the courage to take responsibility for her actions and the courage to face them. All of this made her disdainful of all the old rules and customs such as seniority, self-preservation, caution in speech and action, and not doing a good job. This was a precious quality that only people who had truly experienced great battles could have. In today's Xianyuan sword sect, it was especially precious. The 5-ring sect had been the most powerful sect for nearly 20,000 years. The relatively peaceful passage of time made the people of the 5 rings sect lack a kind of temperament compared to their predecessors. Even if they were still tough, still hunting and looting, but looting and war were 2 different concepts. The universe was changing, and so were people. Nothing could be maintained at the peak forever. This didn't conform to the laws of heaven, nor did it conform to the laws of nature. Everything existed according to a sinusoidal curve. In the long river of time, there were peaks and valleys. This had nothing to do with the people or things themselves. It was the result of the environment, the situation, and many other factors. Often when people were at the bottom, they couldn't feel it. But once there was a change, their true colors would be revealed. The important thing was not to be at the peak forever. That was impossible. The important thing was to be able to survive at the bottom and then quickly adjust to the peak when there was a change. Xianyuan was lucky. In front of them, there was Lu Xiaoyi, and behind them, there was Bu Lian. At this time, the ability of a leader was the only beacon that could bring everyone out of the bottom. Although the two of them had their own shortcomings, like sometimes being immature and sometimes being rash, no one was born a leader. The key was that they were rapidly improving and maturing. Not only them, but also the swordsmen of Xianyuan's sword sect. When the two leaders were real lions, in time, they were destined to return to their original appearances and eventually become a group of lions, allowing Xianyuan to reach the peak again. If this time node could be stuck before and after the change of the era, they would be the creators of Xuanyuan's history. This was the growth of heroes, the birth of legends. It wasn't that they were born different from the rest. This kind of life would only exist in the imagination of biographers. The important thing was that they were walking on the right path. History would write a glorious chapter for them, but at this time and place, it was full of loopholes. The heroes were still busy filling the holes and wiping their butts. This was the real history. Chapter 1810. The reason why I chose to come here is because very few people can understand the true meaning of clear sky to Xianyuan. It was here that Big Stick Li began to stir up the universe. Now it's Little Stick Lu's turn. Smoky Puppet's words were a bit disrespectful because she didn't respect Crow ancestor. But in Xianyuan now, only she had the qualifications to speak like that because she was once Big Stick Li's senior sister and now Little Stick Lu's senior sister. A senior sister is half a mother. The changes of the universe all start here. In a sense, this is the source of the universe's changes. There is Xianyuan, there is the three pure ones, and there is Supreme. Therefore, Zhuozhou's significance in the changing of eras is extraordinary. There are people in Hengyi who have great wisdom, or they received a reminder from a high and mighty existence. How to dig them out is the stick's business. Our mission is defend clear sky, defend Zhuozhou. Smoky Puppet's sharp eyes swept across everyone's faces. I know many of you have different opinions in your hearts. It's okay, Xianyuan never punishes people for their opinions. But in wartime, if you have no opinions, you must go. If you have opinions, you must go. Everyone finally understood the legendary senior sister Bu Lian's domineering aura. She was someone who fought side by side with Crow ancestor. Once, Crow ancestor couldn't do anything to her. Now, after so many years, she became a mother-in-law. Xuanyuan's current three carriages were Lu Xiaoyi, Chong Lu, and Bu Lian. Without mentioning the problem of strength, Granny Bu Lian was also Chong Lu's senior sister. She was the one who grew up, so in terms of potential, Lu Xiaoyi was the most promising. In terms of strength, Lu ancestor was the most powerful, but in terms of experience, no one could surpass this fiery granny. She had died many times for Xianyuan. Just this point alone was enough to make her kneel. We have obtained the authorization of the fifth ring, allowing us to integrate the power of the entire Zhuozhou. Now we have to do a few things. Dispatch messengers to establish strike forces in the major worlds of Zhuozhou as soon as possible, with the monarchs as the main force. Demarcate the airspace and don't let go of any abnormalities. Establish information transmission channels to ensure that we can receive news of the enemy as soon as possible. All Xianyuan swordsmen perfected monarchs were to be on standby in the air, ready to move out at any time. Leaving the realm defense to the inner realm cultivators was their responsibility. Looking at Smoky Horse moving swiftly above, the people below opened their mouths wide. Iceman's sword could not believe his eyes. I say, young Li, what's going on? The head of the Xianyuan family had changed to a big sister? Shouldn't it be big brother? Or did Xianyuan change to husband and wife? Li Shur was also confused. I don't know. Time is like a shackle. An old hen turns into a duck. Why do I feel like Big Sister's aura is even stronger than Big Brother's? Scammers, our luck is pretty good. We're hugging the thickest thighs in the sect. In the future, you'll be able to do whatever you want inside and outside the sect. The Iceman's sword was more clear-headed than him.
Dream on.
It was true that their legs were the thickest, but they also liked to walk into dangerous places the most. Are you sure you have the ability to keep up? Maybe their leg hair will be fine, but if we hug their legs like this, we'll be dead, the two people below muttered. Smoky Horse's tone changed, and his gaze shot over. Iceman's sword, Li Peinan, the two of you have been walking in the blue sky for a long time, so you're familiar with the path. The few left peripheral realms outside the big and small intestine-blind paths will be left to the two of you to contact. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used for a single moment. You're used to being idle in the blue sky, so it's time to go out and do something for the sect. How could the two of them dare to say no? Under the gaze of hundreds of Xianyuan perfected monarchs, they could not collapse. But they were really unwilling to go. It was not that they were afraid of the risk. They had walked this path many times when they were Yuanying. There was no reason for them to be afraid now that they were perfected monarchs. I won't wait for the enemy to come to my door and then rely on the world grand membrane to stop the enemy. I won't wait until I know the enemy's strength before attacking. That's the art of war for mortals, not for cultivators, and definitely not for swordsmen. Find them, and destroy them. If we can't do it, it only means that we don't deserve to have a place in the universe. According to this principle, the entire left periphery will form a tight surveillance network, and we'll attack as we find out. This time, it's about the time when the 13th Great Tao collapses. But we have to consider that the enemy may come earlier. Smoky Horse's arrangement was actually a typical swordsman's characteristic. It was not clever, but it was violent destruction. After reincarnating for several lifetimes, she had never had the experience of arranging specific tactics. Just like in her previous era, Dafa was very clear about the direction, but was careless in small areas. Of course, more specific measures would be done by cultivators who were good at this, such as Le Feng, Guangming, Zhou Fan, Song Rong, and the others. This was also a kind of accumulation of experience. Their group was also the group that would really take up the responsibility in the future. Smoky Horse, very Dafa, handed over the specific strategy to her subordinates. Then, she saw the two fellows who had been winking at each other. Alas, as long as it was related to Little Stick Lu, most of them were like this, very unreliable. But she still valued the relationship between them. Her former friends were no longer there, and now she only had a few friends, including these two living treasures. She once led them to wander around the void of the left periphery. It was also a rare happy life in her cultivation life. She came to the two of them. What? Are you not satisfied with the task I assigned to you? Huang Xiaoya curled her lips. These two fellows have lived a good life for too long. They're greedy for life, afraid of death, and picky. Young Li was very dissatisfied. Xiaoya, you have to speak with your conscience. We didn't lose face for Xianyuan in the last battle. We just had some ideas. How did it become greedy for life and afraid of death? The few of them spoke very casually together, and Smoky Horse couldn't say it out loud. In fact, she assigned this task to the two of them with some selfish motives. Go out and gather the cultivators from the other regions of the left periphery and stay there to be responsible for communicating with Xuanyuan's main forces. This kind of task wasn't very risky. The cultivators of the left periphery had limited strength, and they didn't have the fighting spirit of the swordsman. Therefore, they could fight if they could win and run if they couldn't. There was a high chance of survival. Moreover, they might not be able to make it in time for the big battle. This was the best arrangement for these two friends who weren't strong enough. It wouldn't hurt their self-esteem, and it also gave them the best chance of survival. If they followed the swordsman's main forces, then it would be a true matter of life and death. If they weren't strong enough, then they would almost certainly become the target of others. The swordsman's main forces were the main forces of the final battle. There was no question of whether they would fight or not. The only question was how to fight. With Xuanyuan's fighting style, there was no reason to retreat under a group attack. With their strength, they would be the first to be eliminated. There was no luck to speak of. This was the only thing she could do for them. She didn't expect these two fellows to be so ungrateful. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.